I know better. I wait for Jackie. I think she gave me the nod. Okay. All right. I would like to welcome everybody out to our Harriman City Council work meeting for Wednesday, February 10th, 2021. We will begin with the review of this evening's agenda. Any items that we need to make adjustments to? Okay. Any future agenda items that the council members would like to have added?
Oh, I do have some.
Yes.
My note thing can't recognize my face. I would like to know where we're at on the Motorized Trail Committee. As far as that goes, I'd like to see that, the creation of that. I don't know if that needs to be an agenda item, so we talk about that, but we talked about it last time, got the report.
Yep, we're going to talk about it today, actually, and then into next week, so or
Okay.
the next council meeting. So that's on our discussion for today.
Okay, perfect. And then the issue that was brought up by the resident on the container, I have some heartache over that. We have a lot of storage containers. I understand they're on public property and the difference in that, but it just doesn't feel right to say, sorry, you can't have that container on your property and we can have 1 billion. You know what I mean? Just something doesn't fly well with me on that. I just think that we really need to look at that and address that and see if we can do something other than, even if we said, can you just paint it, a neutral color or, something like that. Because I personally don't think that we should be requiring our residents to brick and stone a container in their backyard either. So I'm having some heartache over that. I'd like the council to discuss that and see if we can come up with some better, because I think storage containers are an awesome storage facility. They're a recycling thing, if nothing else, because they're not shipping them back where they came from. So they're being utilized for certain things. And so I'd like to look at that. Yeah, the other things I'll bring up as we go through them on our items. So those are what I had.
Okay. Leadership task list review. Are there any items that we are looking for updates on that we have not been receiving in our emails?
So that was one thing I had on my list of things. I do so appreciate the leadership task review thing, which I don't mean to be critical here, but I guess I need it to have more meat in it. When it says staff is working on a memo, I don't even know what that really means. Who's working on the memo? Because there's a lot of people on staff. So who's it assigned to? And I can see when it was first brought up, but I can't see any, like a date on there that says this is when we anticipate completion. Because for me, I'm really bad. If somebody brings me something they need done, I have to say, okay, when do you need it done by? Because then I can schedule and structure so I know it has to be done by a certain date. And I'm not indicating anybody's putting it off, but it seems like things happen faster if you know that there's an expectation for it to be completed by such a date. And if it's not going to be completed by such a date, you would be expected to give some sort of an update of why. And so if we could add something like that to it, would be really helpful.
That should be no problem.
Thank you.
I have one question about the task list as well regarding the Bonneville study. We had made a decision to take some of the money that was, I guess, reserved or given back from the Southwest Mayor's Coalition group, and we agreed to use, I think it was $35,000 for kind of updating the Bonneville study. Based on some feedback I got earlier this week, it doesn't look like there's been much traction or progress with the Bonneville study. I know there has been some work done internally by staff to try and do some analysis and update. I think I'd like to hear more about where we stand on that Bonneville study specifically, and probably discuss if and how we need to move forward with it at this time. So.
Okay. We will move on to item 2.1, discussion of proposed amendments to Title V, Public Safety, and Title VI, Vehicle and Traffic. Chase.
Thank you, Council and Mayor. So this is a presentation I'm excited to give tonight. It's the culmination of a lot of effort and hours by a lot of people other than myself. Just to identify some of those people, first our contract prosecutor, Heather Grover. She's right here. She's done a lot of work on this project. as has Debbie Peterson with Animal Services, as well as Sergeant Shaver and Sergeant Bradley with HPD. So right from out of the gate, I just want to thank them for the efforts that they've put into this. And you'll see, and I'm sure you've seen in the packet, the number of red lines that have been made. Those don't come lightly. Those, we've gone through every word of that, referenced that with state statute to make sure that we are compliant with all of those provisions in state statute, but also that we're tailoring our code for us and for our residents. So with that in mind, really the reason why we kind of dove into these two titles specifically was to look at ways that we can better enforce these provisions and restrictions within our city. Statutory language is kind of a hairy beast. If you've ever tried to draft an ordinance or draft legislation, you have to think of everything, every scenario that could possibly be captured by that. Because if you don't, there's going to be a resident who finds that gap and that loophole. And that's not a bad thing, right? It helps us shore up that language. But really, it should be generally applicable to our residents and to our city within the confines of state code as well. Just a short legal lesson of some of the procedures that we, or the reasons why we really looked at this in terms of enforcement. In order to really enforce legislation, you have to have certain requirements. A few of those are the mens rea and actus reus. Police love this, right? Police love looking at what is it that constitutes a violation, so the act, and what mental state or what was the intent of the person when they were acting in violation of an ordinance, in our case. So those are some of the things that we looked at. We also looked at ambiguities, right? Again, I mentioned you try to write legislation that's generally applicable. If, however, there are ambiguities, courts construe those ambiguities in favor of the defendant, or in our case, against the city and in favor of the residents. So we tried to shore up some of those ambiguities in this process. Also, we wanted to make sure that every violation had an individual or a department within the city that was able to enforce that. So Titles 5 and 6 deal primarily with HPD and with Animal Services. You'll see also some of the changes that we've proposed to Title 6 include a new civil enforcement of parking violations, which I'll talk about in a little more detail as well, but that increases the scope of our enforcement for some of those provisions and regulations. I forgot I had a PowerPoint, everyone. I went through this here really quick. Again, just some of the legal basis for our methodology here, why we've done this, again, to shore up some of the ambiguities, to make sure that we're complying with state statute and also federal statute in some cases, right? It's not just the state that we're worried about when we're drafting legislation for our city. Our process as we went through this was really just to look at what we had in place. I think the city's done a great job of making sure that their ordinances are up to date, that they comply with state and federal code. So really that was the groundwork off of which we built. We didn't have to start from ground zero. We just took what we had and went with it. We sat down, and this was probably the most laborious part of this process, was sitting down with HPD, with Sergeant Shaver, with Debbie, and seeing what it is that they see that are gaps within our ordinances, where there are ambiguities, where the language is inconsistent, and then taking that feedback and applying it to what Heather, our prosecutor, sees in the courtroom. You know, where we're able to cite, but maybe not able to get a conviction. That would be a situation where there's some ambiguity that we would want to clean up. And then where appropriate, we created and we've proposed new regulations that would apply to Titles 5 and 6 within the city. There aren't many of those. You'll see a few that are substantial within Title 6, but mostly we've just, again, shored up some of those ambiguities and made sure that everything's consistent with state and federal codes. I'll start with Title 5. Again, some of the minor changes you'll see in Title 5 is a review of all the definitions. Again, and I'm just going to keep repeating this, we want to avoid ambiguities, and that includes internal cross-references within our code. So it's important that we go through and make sure all of our definitions are clearly defined, so that we're making sure that we cover all sorts of violations that would otherwise have slipped through because of a lack of a clear definition. We've also gone through and made sure that we've defined what it is that actually constitutes a violation. So it's not simply enough to define what's allowed and what isn't allowed, but to define what actually is or is not a violation within the code for Title V. One of the other major things that we've done is we've reduced the penalty level. So cities under state statute are allowed to charge criminally up to a Class B misdemeanor. That's not, I don't think, in the city's best interest, right? I think there are certain situations, especially within animal services codes, where an infraction is more appropriate. An infraction, you can still impose a fine. There's no jail time, however, and so with that comes additional protections and less substantial consequences that you might otherwise have for a Class C or Class B misdemeanor. Additionally, a conviction for one of those shows up on a criminal record, right? And we've had instances, and there's a real-life example within our city of someone who was charged and convicted of an animal offense, and it was, I believe, a Class B misdemeanor that impeded them from getting admitted to a school of their choosing, right? And I don't think that should be the city's priority to come. We have that authority to do that, but saying that every animal code violation is a Class B misdemeanor, I don't know, is the best policy. And so that's one of the things we've tried to do is shore that up so that our penalties are a little less severe while still being able to enforce those provisions and policies that we think are appropriate within our city. Additionally, we've established additional appeal procedures for civil violations, so we're allowing the code enforcement as well as animal services to write civil notices of violations. So rather than initiating a case within the justice court, we can attempt to deal with these problems administratively, thereby avoiding any bogging down of our justice court system and some of those other criminal consequences that I described. Before I jump into Title VI, I want to invite Debbie up just for a minute. I asked her to come tonight just to kind of give us some of her insight into this process, some of the, not specific changes that were made, but just generally what process we went through here and her role in this. I didn't put you on the spot, did I, Debbie?
A little bit.
A little bit, okay.
Just in going through this, I was worked through with the Harriman, current.
We just pulled the mic down a little bit
Sorry.
closer so we can make sure we hear you.
I was reading through the current Harriman ordinances and then also reading through some other cities' ordinances. And I came from another city where I'd spent 17 years there. So I was reviewing some of the ordinances that we set up in that other city about 5-6 years ago. So I was up to date on a lot of ordinances that we needed to change there and just reviewing through Harriman, going with my experiences and what we need to do with Harriman.
So I've included both a clean copy of Title V as well as a redlined copy. The redlined copy, like I said, just indicates some of the changes that we're proposing. The clean one's just in there for simplicity of reading. Do any of you have any questions before we move on to Title VI regarding Title V for either myself or for Debbie or for Heather?
Not a question, just a statement, and I think it's very relevant to what we were just told, and that is that I think some of the best things that can be taken into account when we're establishing these ordinances is experience. And because, again, over time, you really find out where those true issues lie and really what is the appropriate way and level to deal with those. And so I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that and that you bring that experience to this process because, again, I think that's the most valuable component of the information that goes into these.
That's true, Councilmember Smith, and I appreciate that. And I think Heather and I would both agree that we would not have been able to really do this without the experience of Debbie here, so we appreciate that. Any other questions about Title V?
So, no, but I do have some more concerns about some of the language in the latest update. So I'll reach out through emails and stuff to try and see if we can work through some of the concerns and then,
Sure.
because we're not obviously ready to move forward quite yet, so.
And that's an important point, Councilmember Oren. So this is, again, first presentation we've seen on this. You've had a copy of it for a few months now, but that doesn't mean that we're going to know everything that we want to change. So it may take a few meetings before we really have a version that we're comfortable approving. So, awesome. Thanks, Debbie. So I'll move on to Title VI. You'll see some more substantial changes in Title VI than you did in Title V. As I identified earlier, that includes the civil enforcement of parking violations, as well as changes to the towing restrictions within the city. We also did all the same things that we did with Title V, where we made sure that our internal cross references, as well as references to state and federal code, were consistent. And much like we did with Title V, we reduced the penalty level for moving violations and non-moving violations to an infraction. This is actually a move that the state took, 2 or 3 years ago within their own traffic code to essentially decriminalize non-moving violations. So just about every violation within Title VI is an infraction. So I'm going to jump right into the civil infraction and civil enforcement provisions within Title VI. This is a quote directly out of the proposed language of the new code. And essentially what we're attempting to do, or recommending that the City Council do with civil enforcement of parking violations, is to decriminalize those, right? This is something that has traditionally been handled through the justice courts. Sworn officers go out, write a criminal citation for a parking violation, which then initiates a case within our justice courts. Those individuals then show up, have to spend the afternoon in justice court, which is an experience in and of itself, and then they have to handle that case all the way up to a jury trial. Or not, I'm sorry, not a jury trial, but a bench trial, because it's an infraction. We're trying to do away with that process and make it more administrative. And hopefully you'll see why that is beneficial not only for the city, but also for the residents who may be on the receiving end of some of these civil infractions. So generally what's happening is we're taking away not taking it away, we're shifting the priority to civil enforcement. HPD can still enforce these violations criminally if they choose, if they respond to any other incident, and it seems advantageous for them at that time to include an additional criminal non-moving violation. They can do that, but what we're doing is shifting it now to a civil enforcement. In tandem with that, we're also shifting it away from HPD. So a code enforcement officer, for instance, could enforce the non-moving violations within the city. And instead of receiving a criminal citation, an individual who is illegally parked, for instance, would just receive a civil citation that they would have to deal with administratively with the city. The procedure for that is not unlike what you see with the police. Instead of an HPD sworn officer going out, we would have a code enforcement officer who is a civilian out patrolling for parking violations, for instance. They would write a civil infraction or a civil citation that would be recorded with the city, and then that individual who received that civil citation would have 5 days to either pay the fee or contest the violation to an appeal authority. In order to contest it, they would have to make a written request to have a hearing before the civil hearing examiner, who we already have in place, ready to go in case someone does receive one of these civil citations. And that civil hearing examiner would hear that as if it were a criminal case, and instead of deciding it beyond a reasonable doubt, however, it would just be decided on the civil standard of beyond a preponderance of the evidence. And what that means in layman terms, is that it's more likely than not that they committed the parking infraction. The hearing examiner has a few choices after hearing the case. They could uphold that civil citation and impose the applicable fee. They could make a determination based upon circumstances of the individual receiving the fee, either to impose a different penalty or work with that individual to maybe do community service, or they could, if they found that the city didn't prove its case beyond a preponderance of the evidence, just dismiss the civil violation entirely. And because we value due process, the individual who received the violation has an opportunity to actually appeal the hearing examiner's decision to a district court if they do not like that finding.
Chase, as I was reading through this, maybe I missed it. I didn't see how a hearing examiner would be selected or what the qualifications for that would be.
So we have a hearing examiner for our ordinance violations in terms of nuisances for land use and things like that. I've spoken with that individual, and they've offered to do that. It's a professional service that we don't have to set up for procurement. And so I've asked them to just continue in that role for this process as well, since it is essentially also a violation of our city ordinance. The violation process and notification procedures are substantially the same. And so I felt that having that person fulfill this role as well would be beneficial for the city. We always can include someone else. They're a licensed attorney. There's that requirement that they be a licensed attorney and have some of that experience in hearing cases, weighing evidence, and making a finding.
So my concern about this too is budgeting for additional code enforcement officers when we're struggling to add additional people anyway. And so if we take this off the role of currently the police officers, this isn't going to happen. So we're going to continue to see parking violations, complaints from residents, and not have the manpower to enforce it. That's concerning to me.
Yeah, I'm going to let Deputy Chief Stromberg speak to that.
That's a great question, Councilman Moore, and you're absolutely correct. And that's part of our ongoing discussions as we've looked at this process. They're really the crux of this discussion, and it's been going on for several years, as Chase alluded to, even back before the creation of HPD. In our initial discussions of it, I believe we're actually centered around the fee schedule as we were sitting down talking to Alan, trying to figure that out. And so what we're not trying to shift workload away from HPD and have to hire more code enforcement officers necessarily as we go through the budget process and we look at staffing both on the code enforcement side and the HPD side. There are a number of different variations and options that we might employ. However, because of the way that this has been designed, our current HPD officers and our traffic unit and those who are primarily responsible for this would still be able to enforce these civil violations. The purpose of this exercise, as Chase alluded to, one was to clean up ambiguity in our current code, and two, really to decriminalize things that should not be criminal. Chase glazed over real quick, but we had a resident in the city who was precluded admission from a post-secondary education institution because she had a Class B misdemeanor conviction on her record because she had pled to one of these fines or one of these things that should have been an administrative infraction and instead was charged as a Class B misdemeanor because of the way the statute is designed. So that's the purpose of this.
How long ago was that, just out of curiosity?
2 or 3 years, Debbie. It was a while. It was part of our early discussions as we were talking about this, but again, the purpose of this is to decriminalize things that shouldn't be criminalized, but those tools are still available. So an HPD officer could go still write a civil infraction for a parking violation, and that would be able to go through this process without having to subject that resident to the criminal citation process through the justice court. So
I really appreciate that feedback because that was concerning to me. But as long as we understand that if we're having an issue with parking violations in a place and we don't have enough code enforcement to go take care of it, we can depend on the police department to take care of it.
It's not our, and tell you right out that it's not our intent to push all of that off to code enforcement. We'll still be primarily responsible for addressing those violations. And then as we have discussions further with Wendy and our city administration about what we look at for staffing as we move into the new budget year, those discussions are ongoing, and that will certainly be a part of it.
Okay, because I'm definitely in support of decriminalizing all of the stuff that doesn't make sense. It was just the biggest concern there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I have a couple questions. The first thing is, we started saying I'm very much in favor of this decriminalization process. I think this is a great move. I'm really supportive of this. But I have two questions. Number one is, are there any other civil codes that the HPD is enforcing on a regular basis? Do you have the ability to enforce other codes in the city, or are we talking about just this Title VI non-moving violation stuff?
So essentially, and I'll kick this to Chase too, but essentially anything that's code enforcement, that's a civil violation of our code, the way that the statutes or our ordinances are written allows any agent of the city to do that enforcement. So technically we could, we're not right now, as far as the code enforcement issues. We obviously leave that to our fabulous code enforcement team, and then we're there as assistance for them when needed. So right now, from an HPD side, we're not issuing any civil enforcement summons right now.
And the reason I asked that is because of question number 2 then, this appears to be, to me, an exception to our normal practice of separating criminal behavior from civil ordinance violations, right? And as we don't do that with any of our other civil violations or being enforced by the HPD, I'm concerned that there's a dual role here. There's not a clear separation of, I don't know if we want our police enforcing civil code, right? Or our code enforcement officers trying to enforce the law, right? For criminal activity. And I could see that as we're going through, our budget discussions, I think there may be discussions about how assets, time, people are allocated to make sure that that's being done appropriately. I guess I would just verbalize, without having fully vetted out, a concern about this being different than how we handle other things.
That's a great point. And those, like I said before, those discussions are ongoing. And we're not really to a point yet where we've clearly presented and articulated that to Wendy and to Tammy and to Alan and the budget committee. So once we make those presentations, then certainly we'll loop all that information out. But we have the same concern that you do. Right. And so we're working on some solutions that might take us in a little bit of a different direction, but certainly would help to draw that more clean line. The reality is, and even prior to the creation of HPD, because of the way these ordinances are written, what we ended up with was either criminal enforcement of things that shouldn't be crimes, or non-enforcement, because we didn't want to write a criminal citation for it, because we didn't want to send the person to the justice court, and so really it was just a, hey, don't do that again, slap on the wrist, and we move on, which doesn't change behavior either. So
Makes sense.
it's a great point, and we are working on some ways to draw a cleaner line, so to speak, that I think you'll see in some of our budget presentations.
Fair enough, and we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Cody.
Thanks, Cody. One of the things Cody alluded to was, and you as well, Councilmember Shields, is kind of the dual role, right? Is that the best use of our staff? Not necessarily, but I also think, like Cody mentioned, leaving it where it's either black or white, like HPD is actually going out to write a criminal citation for a parking violation, or they're not going to, is kind of the middle ground that you have to balance. And one of the things that we did in looking at this is, under state statute, police can enforce certain things, including civil violations. And then we looked at the opposite end. What can civilians enforce for the city, all the way up to criminal infractions? And so there is almost a Venn diagram of sorts of a sweet spot that they can enforce both criminal infractions as well as civil violations. So that's, you can shift that either way, and that may be part of this larger discussion that we have to make sure that we're using our staff appropriately, efficiently, and being fiscally responsible with those positions and these programs.
And I would kind of reiterate Councilman Smith's comments from before, where he talks about, the value of experience in doing this, right? I understand this is a transition period. There's going to be some, figuring it out as we go kind of thing. And I'm comfortable with that process of figuring it out. I would just like it to be figured out at one point.
Absolutely.
so that there's clarity there. If the purpose of this is to avoid ambiguity, I think there's still some ambiguity in this part that I'm uncomfortable with. So
Sure. Okay. I'll work on that. Any other questions before I move on that? Okay. So this is our proposed fee schedule. This is pretty consistent with other cities and municipalities and counties that have this type of civil parking enforcement. If a violation is issued, and if the recipient of that violation pays the citation within the first 5 calendar days, it's $25. Pretty minimal. It can obviously stack up, and sometimes you have to make a business decision about whether you're going to accrue a $25 fine to park wherever you need to.
So can I interject right there? Why would you have calendar days rather than business days? Because don't they have to come in to pay it or have access to us to pay it?
So that's a great question. We looked at doing it, or I looked at doing it as business days. However, there are programs that the city can license that would allow someone to pay that online at any time, including on non-business business days. So that's, again, something that we can change. I anticipate people will call customer service, they'll call the city to ask questions about that. And obviously, those would only come in on business days. But with the licensing of that software and the availability that people have to pay those fines on calendar days, including on the weekends, that was the initial proposal that I suggested we make.
What kind of cost is associated with that software license?
So it depends on the software that you use. It can be anywhere from a few $100s a month to a few $1,000s. And that would be the next kind of step that I would want to bring to the council, is a breakdown of those things. That's right, Windia. We talked with Ellen about doing that as
I
well.
like that answer better.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but I will personally push back a little bit on that, just because we talk about unintended consequences of things. There'll simply be people who say, I couldn't get the app to load, or I couldn't get access to it, those kinds of things. So if we say business days, there's no excuse. There would be access to City Hall for at least 5 business days. So personally, I just feel more comfortable. It eliminates that kind of excuse or maybe legitimate reason why it didn't get paid.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
I'm actually in agreement with Sherry on that one. I prefer business days over calendar days. I think it's cleaner in the administrative side.
Sure.
Ditto.
Okay. I think that's a great change.
Glad you agree with us.
Yeah. Oh, always, always. Well, it's the lawyer mind thinking versus the policymaker, right? So I appreciate that different
I understand the
perspective.
reasoning for sure, but
Yeah.
just the way it impacted people, it makes me worried.
So I'll make those changes. The idea behind the fee schedule is that it increases, right, as the time passes from when they were first issued the violation. That second period of time, 6 and 10, we'll call it business days now, it only goes up $10. It's not a substantial change. But after that, it is more substantial, right? So it incentivizes people to take care of these issues early. And then for every month that they don't take care of it, it tacks on another $25. So rather than an interest-based charge, it's just simply a flat fee increase over time. With that in mind, however, the city isn't just going to let these tickets go into default so that they're $1,000 after a few years, right? The idea behind this is because it is an ordinance, it can also be enforced criminally. So we are able, if an individual defaults on a parking violation, to have our prosecutor file a criminal information to initiate a case in the justice court. While that's what we were trying to avoid in the first place, this will only be used in the situations when someone defaults on paying their citation, or they receive multiple citations and just aren't dealing with them.
Do we have it codified as to what constitutes a default? Is there a monetary amount or a time frame
So,
that constitutes after this date, we're going to take this action?
It does. It states if they're in default after the 15 days, we could initiate that criminal information at that point, after the 15 days.
Is that something we're likely to do at day 16? Or is this something we're going to let ride for a while?
You know, that may be a policy-based decision we'd have to come to. It might be difficult to file criminal informations on every single one that happens after 15 days. And it may be in the city's best interest to say, if you contact the city on day 16, you know, we are not going to do this. In fact, we'll just impose a reduced fine or something of that nature. And individuals can still contest a parking citation after that 15-day period. It's simply that if they're found guilty of that violation, the fee that would be imposed by the civil enforcement officer would be the one based upon the number of days it took them to contest that violation. So there's a lot of administrative flexibility that's built into it to, again, allow the city to do what's in the best interest of the city and also be flexible to benefit the resident, right? The hard line, which is codified, is no, you're in default now. You're going to owe the increased penalties, and we can collect that because it's codified.
Again, I go back to the language was used earlier, is that part of the whole reason for this change is to eliminate ambiguity from the code, right? This appears to me another instance of some ambiguity, meaning at day 16, we're calling them in default, but we don't have a definitive policy or codified steps that say at day 60, or if the fine has tripled, or if, then we're going to take the criminal action on it. I'd like to see something that clarifies that so that it's not so, some we're going to do at day 16, some we may not do for 2 years.
I'm not sure I agree with you there, Steve. And the reason for that is because I want to make sure that we don't take the flexibility out of the ability of the agent to enforce how they see fit. There might be situations that make sense to go one way or another, and I think it's up to, I think I would personally trust whoever we select as that agent, the code enforcement officer, the police officer, to make that determination. Giving them the option of doing it at a certain date, which is set by whatever we set as default, gives them that option. And then saying no later than this time, it might be appropriate as well. But I don't think saying that we have to have on day 45, you're good, day 46, you're not, or day 15, day 6, I don't think having a specific day necessarily that they're required to is necessarily helpful in the enforcement process.
The problem is I see an unequitable application of the law, that somebody could be charged with a criminal action at day 16, and other people wouldn't be charged for the criminal action on the same thing for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
That isn't an equitable application of the law, and it leaves so much gray area in there.
I'm gonna
I mean,
ask
we're
our-
talking about non-criminal, non-moving parking violations,
Yeah,
right?
I'm going to ask
I
our
think it's easy to just
deputy chief
clarify
to
that.
chime in on this.
Just 2 quick points, Mayor, just for clarification, what we're talking about is the civil hearing administrative officer. We're not talking about the person who actually issues the civil cite. That's done, and then the clock starts. So this decision that we're discussing and this person who we're either allowing to have that discretion or not is actually the civil hearing officer on the back end. The second point is the problem with not allowing for a little bit of discretion. Councilmember Shields and the prosecutor, they love cases where they have to wait a certain number of days to take action. For example, if we have somebody who's received a summons or a citation that is clearly obstructionist or is clearly, they're not going to cooperate with the process, on day 16, the prosecutor has the option to file that criminal information and move it to the justice court, right? Where if somebody is clearly not cooperating with the process and they're clearly have indicated that they're not going to pay the civil fine or follow the procedure that's prescribed, if you put a time frame on that, then now the prosecutor has to sit and twiddle their thumbs for that 60 days or whatever you decide it is.
Sure.
Before they can file that information. So that's just one of,
And I think
it's a good point, but that's just one of the reasons why we try to allow for a little bit of flexibility in those.
Sure, and I think that's a very valid point, except for the fact that I don't necessarily want us to take action because somebody's being an a-hole, whether somebody's really nice, right? That doesn't seem a good reason for us to take a criminal action versus not taking a criminal action.
Yeah, or what if you just simply don't like the person? If you're in the maybe subject to it and you're the person making the decision and you just don't like that person, or you've had a bad day and you hate all people of that gender that day, maybe you just take action on it. It just opens it up for abuse I see that the problem with it is anytime we have code that says it may be this, it's like, ugh. It's not really a rule. It's we'll decide whether or not we enforce that or not today.
Councilman Smith, do you have any thoughts on this?
I actually, I agree with actually leaving the latitude in there. I think that, again, that the situations can become so dynamic, and there's so many variables that can be part of it, just as our deputy chief just described there. I think that having the latitude and not just these absolute hard and fast rules, because again, I think these situations are going to change and we need to give that latitude to those who are who've been designated to see over the process and help, resolve these issues moving forward. So I like the latitude in there.
And I would suggest that I'm supportive of latitude as long as that latitude is
Consistent.
spelled out. These are the
Yeah.
reasons why we would delay, or these are the reasons we wouldn't delay.
And that would be my recommendation to staff is, you've kind of got some feedback from us on this particular item. Let's see if there's some way that we can come in to make sure that, to try to maybe meet somewhere in the middle of making sure we have that flexibility for the agent of the city, but then also ensuring that things are being administered fairly across all residents and not, I'm sure there's a way to do it, and you're way smarter than I am, so I'm going to let you do that, Chase.
We'll figure that out.
He's going to use that quote, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I agree
On the
with
record.
what the points were made, was like, well,
Yeah.
this is why it's in there, for sure,
Right.
understand that, but then I worry about the side that it could be abused on, so how do we strike a fair balance so that we protect it?
Okay. I'll make some of those changes and bring that back. Any additional questions? So this is, that's the extent of my presentation on the civil enforcement. I have one more section, and then to wrap up this discussion. Any questions, though, before I move on to the towing portion of this?
And this is exclusively non-moving, correct? This is not.
This is non-moving violations, which includes non-moving violations of state code, which are adopted into our traffic code, as well as those that we have specifically set out as non-moving violations within our own city.
Other than parking, is there anything that we would expect this to come up on a regular basis?
Registration. You see a lot of expired registration of vehicles that are parked on the public right away. It's a pretty common one. Okay. So towing, this is a new chapter that we've proposed to be added to Title VI. And really what we're trying to do here is limit the circumstances of predatory towing that are happening in our city. After having conversations with Sergeant Shaver and Sergeant Bailey and others in HPD who have responded to incidents of predatory towing, we've looked at what other cities have done to kind of curtail this and proposed that similar language be adopted within our own city. It still allows private property owners, particularly HOAs, that's who this mostly affects, to enforce parking within their own boundaries and on their own private property, consistent with their CCNRs. All it does is simply have stricter requirements for those towing companies that respond to those calls for service from these HOAs.
Can I ask a question? Do we have any, even if it's just anecdotal, a report on how often the predatory towing happens in our
I'd love
city?
to, yeah, Sergeant Shaver, I think, would love to
How many
give us a-
cases of that we might have
Really
seen?
wants to come up to the microphone. You can just see it.
You have to
You're a
have
sick
better
man.
dreams.
So I don't have an exact number of, I can tell you that this is predatory versus this is not.
Sure.
But I have some examples. And we've ran into cases where a resident comes out, they drive home, for example, over by RSL, you have Rockhound Drive. It's a long stretch of road, it's HOA. We have residents drive home, they pull in front of their driveway so they can take their groceries upstairs and put them away, come down, move their car where they need to be, so they're not walking 50, 100 yards trying to drag groceries and little children up to their home. Well, in a particular incident, this woman was doing that. She looks out the window and they're right there towing her car. So she intervened on Academy Parkway. When she intervened, it turned into an issue. She ends up shattering the window of the tow truck. It's gone through the justice court. She's, dealt with that side of things of what happened. But that whole situation wouldn't have occurred if some of these ordinances that we're asking to be put in place are followed by the tow companies. If a tow company's intent is to go through based on contract and tow a car, which we're fine doing, that's absolutely their right to do so. We're trying to curb the cases where, the tow driver pulls out his OC because now he's confronted with some hostile car owner. We're trying to curb the deal where, an individual's playing musical cars because he's trying to abide by our city ordinance and state law, as well as his HOA policies. And he's pulling one car out of the garage, but in order to utilize that car, he has to move his other one down the way temporarily to play musical cars. Well, he does this, goes in the house, grabs his other set of keys to move the car, comes out, and they're towing his car. And then we're running into the confrontation of, well, this is messed up. And they're like, well, you pay the $80 on a drop fee, and you can have your car right here. Well, now we're running into the problems, well, wait, you're married to the car owner, but your name's not on the registration. I'm not going to drop it for you. I'm going to take it and charge you $160. So there's a lot of instances with our tow companies that are, I feel, taking it beyond that point and actually penalizing our residents more unless we had some policies in place that says you can't do this. And Provo City had, I'm sure if you've done some Google research, massive incidents a few years ago in regards to their students at BYU. And we're trying to make sure that that problem doesn't escalate here with the amount of building that's going on and the amount of residents that are moving in.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I was more just curious than anything else is, how often is this happening in our city? And I haven't heard anything about it. And so I just wanted to see if,
Well, we've
not
had,
that it's a good idea to do, let's be proactive here and stop this, even if it's not happening, but I was just curious as to.
we had 2 cases just this past weekend.
Wow.
Crazy.
Are we finding, Sergeant, are we finding that there are times where they have gone through a proper procedure and they are getting towed for an appropriate reason and they still are, or are we hearing about that? Are we?
Well, there's
involved
both
in that?
ends, right? There's, so the other night, this past weekend, we had one incident where there's some gray area, and there's one on the tow where, dude, you're completely parked in the wrong spot. This, some of this ordinance that, as you read through it, will state, well, as a person moves into one of these areas, they're to be notified by that HOA. These are our regulations. This is what's going to happen. If you have a friend or someone come and visit, they got to abide by these same rules. And the incident that occurred the other night was that lack of communication between the renter and his friend who came and visit. So the friend gets his car towed, right? Well, I think this helps spells that out to where when we get there, we say, bro, you got to talk to your buddy here because they're completely within their right to do what they're doing. As long as everything, as you enter the complex, it's posted appropriately as the statute would say, fine schedules are on there, who the towing company is, it's manned 24/7, so if you walk outside and your car's gone, you can make that phone call and get in touch with somebody. And next thing you know, you're not waiting until Monday because they choose not to answer the phone, and you get charged double on storage fees. So, and this is what we're trying to do is ask our tow companies that are contracting with our HOAs to follow good moral rules and not take advantage of people, in a nutshell.
Nice. It's just funny to me. You don't envision these types of problems. I would never think that you could have your car towed in the time it would take you to haul your groceries and back. But
And
guess so.
it's upsetting to us
Yeah.
because, we're stuck between that rock and the hard place because we don't have, there's state law basically on those, but it's pretty vague. So we're trying to clean that up so we can say, listen, you're not doing it right. If part of one of the stipulations of this would be call into HPD dispatch 15 minutes prior to a tow. Well, if they're going in and they're calling 15 minutes prior to the tow, and then the next thing you know, we get a phone call through dispatch, 5 minutes later of his intent, well, he didn't wait that 15 minutes, right? Hey, tow guy, we're sorry, drop the car. You're not getting this towed.
Yeah, that's good.
So we're trying to take care of our residents, make sure people could come here, with our motto, live, work, and play, and not feel victimized.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that.
I was really really appreciative of the work in this area because I think it's great policy, great way to write it. I just, to Sherry's point, flabbergasted that's happening. What kind of, anyway.
There's some dishonest tow companies, and there's others that are really, really good. And what this helps us, myself and my unit do, is be able to go regulate these tow companies as well, and make sure that if they're gonna come to our city and perform their business, they're doing so with equipment that is safe. If they're gonna tow a car and drive down the road, it's not gonna fall off, or axle's gonna drop. So it's given us some opportunities there to make sure who we ask to be on our rotations, or who we ask, or who comes in our city to do these tows are equipped properly, and they're taking care of their equipment as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant Shaver.
Chase, I've got a question for you. Thank you, Sergeant. Appreciate it. Have we reached out to any of the HOAs that would most likely be affected by this and had their input on any of this?
Not other than providing public notice that this was going to be one of the changes, but I think that would be appropriate to let them know.
Particularly the ones that probably are going to be the most affected. I think there's a few that, and I'm betting that our friends at HPD could probably point directly to which ones they were, that we may need to, I think it would be appropriate to make sure they've been informed that these changes might be coming so they can provide any input. I would much rather, as we do with our land code and anytime we do something with zoning, we do neighborhood meetings, I think it would behoove us to maybe reach out to some of the HOAs as well. With that being said, having seen predatory towing at BYU, I know how bad it can get, and I know how absurd it can truly be. I am 100% supportive of finding ways to make sure that we are protecting our residents, but also making sure that we are allowing HOAs to fulfill their CC&Rs. I would struggle, I think of some of these HOAs that we have that have extremely narrow streets, and the reason they're so aggressive sometimes about towing is because they can't get through if they don't. And so if we're getting in a situation, I don't want to prevent the HOA from, keeping their streets clear, but at the same time, I absolutely don't want predatory towing practices in our city. And so I think that we're absolutely on our way. I appreciate the effort of our PD and staff to get on this, and I'm fully supportive of moving this forward. But let's just make sure that we're also not cutting off the hands of the HOA to enforce their own policies that they do actually have by just maybe bringing them in, or at least informing them so they can make comment if they want to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion.
Well, I won't go through all of the, Sergeant Shaver touched on most of the additions to this chapter. There's some other procedures that are spelled out in here. I won't go through each one of those.
I didn't see in there, and I might have missed it, were there any identification requirements?
With regard to,
The tow drivers?
yes, there's requirements that they have to identify themselves, they have to wear certain clothing. And that's all consistent with state code as well. So, and one of the most important changes that I think will curb a lot of this predatory towing is it's not simply enough for tow drivers to just patrol in the neighborhoods 24/7. They actually have to respond to a call for service from the HOA. So the HOA has to be aware of an issue, respond by calling the tow company to come in and take care of that issue. And then once they arrive, the tow company has additional requirements that they have to follow. And I think as Sergeant Shaver identified, that will curb a lot of these issues that happen when people are taking their groceries in or,
So I
playing
think
musical cars.
I think that's something that the HOAs are probably going to have a problem with having to always be a phone call, because that means that there has to be somebody that is authorized on behalf of the HOA to make that phone call. So if there's an issue going on at, Friday afternoon when the management company's gone home, then there may or may not be somebody available to make that call until the next week. I think there's some room to work on that. I think that it's appropriate to not let them just go in and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just, do whatever. I think if they had posted times where it was patrolled, I think that I would be more comfortable with that. But I would I think the HOAs are probably going to push back on saying we have to call every single time because one of the reasons they use these towing services is because they can't be there 24/7. So,
So there is an exception to that built within the code.
okay,
And that is if the tow company gets approval and becomes on the city's tow rotation, as well as enters into a contract with the HOA, and the contract has to have specific
Okay,
provisions
all right,
about that. So,
all right.
so that would
Okay.
capture that situation. that you
And I
described.
think that, yeah, I mean, okay.
Well, that's all I have. I think I've got some good feedback on where we're at. Like I said, it'll likely take a few meetings for us to whittle this down to a final product that we think is best for our city moving forward, but I've got some good feedback. So unless anyone else has anything else, that's all I have.
Thanks, Chase.
Oh, we didn't even get to hear from the prosecutor.
You can
She
put
was
her
here
on
the whole
spot.
time. All right.
You'll hear from her when your case comes before
Oh,
her.
I hope I never have. All right, so that takes us to item 2.2, discussion of Harriman Volunteer Citizens Boards and Commission. Wendy.
All right, Mayor and Council, I'm excited to be here again. All of our wonderful volunteers have signed up for their interest in boards and commissions. A couple of things that we noticed while we were going through these again this year was that some of them are not functioning probably in the way that they should. We have, as you can see on your list, we have a lot of interest, and that's fantastic, but sometimes boards and commissions can get too large. And so we'd like to come back to you with some updates on these boards and commissions, updating specifically the Economic Development Committee, as well as putting some caps on the board membership, not the volunteer membership. I see those as two different things. But I'd like to get some direction from you all on that. And Councilmember Orrin brought up the OHV committee, so I'd like some direction on moving that way. What we did this year, because the boards and commissions that were appointed last year really didn't get to participate very much due to COVID, we reached out to them first just to make sure they were willing to continue to serve. And then we put out a feeler for those that might be interested in serving in addition to those people. And I think that our response was so high because people are itching to do something. So I was really excited that we got so much interest, and our liaisons have changed a little bit as well, the staff that interact with those boards and commissions. And so I think we're going to have a really productive year with this group. So what we're looking for is just some direction from you on how you want us to proceed with updating these, bringing these back to you with some suggested and recommended updates.
What would be your recommendation for the number of board members for a committee?
When I've asked some other agencies, their recommended number is between 5 and 9, and it just depends on the size of their community and how theirs are set up. There are some cities that each council member appoints a person to be on the board from their area or their district. There are some that just appoint from wherever. It doesn't matter where they come from. If they're a subject matter expert in that field, that council member may still want them in that position to further the work of the board. So it's kind of all over the place. It really just depends on how you want to move forward with it.
Yeah, I was just noticing, like for instance, on Healthy Harriman, there are several on there that are not from our community.
Yes. And some of those are from agencies like Salt Lake County Health Department. So that's why they may be on that board, but not affiliated with Harriman City.
Awesome. So you're looking for direction from us as far as like how many board members you think we should have in these committees?
So first, I wanted to bring you the list with one addition who came in after the packet went out for our Veterans and Military Advisory Committee. I'm probably going to butcher this name terribly, but I'm going to try my best. Famai Tapau is interested on serving the Veterans and Military Advisory Committee. He is not included on your list, but I would like to include his name for the consent agenda for next council meeting. That would be my first ask. And there is another member of the community, and his name, he wants to serve, but he wasn't sure which board he wanted to serve on. So you may see 2 extra people on this list next time.
Okay.
My second ask is, once we approve these, staff would like to start working on revising the code as it currently exists and bringing that back to you. And if you have recommendations on size right now, that's great, or we can do more research on our end to see what might be a better fit.
I am definitely supportive of having a board versus volunteers on the committee. I think you probably hit right on the head of there's too many cooks in the kitchen and not enough pastry chefs, or however you want to say it. So I am fully supportive of that. I think as a general rule, I'll probably, I don't have a problem with a 7-member board. And then how we want to appoint that, if we want to just appoint that as kind of the way we've been doing it, or seniority, or if we want to do something where I don't really care, in all honesty. I think they have their merits, and I would kind of look to staff for an actual recommendation on what they think the best way to do that is.
There are some cities that also do an application process, so you can see what their experience level is. I don't know if that's a way you want to go. We're completely open. We just want to
I don't know, I actually kind of like the idea of council members. Let's see, if there were 7, 5 are appointed by individual council members, and 2 are appointed by the council as a whole based on the recommendation of staff. I think that could be beneficial to, keeping things robust. But, like I said, I wouldn't be upset either way.
Can I ask for, Mayor, a question here about board size? Are you suggesting a 7 members plus the staff liaison plus the council member, so a 9-member board? Or are you thinking 5 plus council member plus liaison, which would be 7?
Either way is fine. I'd be fine with 5 plus council plus a staff member. I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't see anything wrong with that either. I just know on some of these, I can only speak because I'm, the Arts Council, right? There's so many different people that represent a different part of the arts in the community, right? That are part of, Miss Harriman, or part of the singing group, or the orchestra, or different groups that have reason to have representation in this group, that I don't know if it makes sense to exclude them or not. So I'm just, again, we get into the ambiguity thing, right? Should we have 5 or 7 or 9, or is it too many or not enough? And I suppose there's a point where you have to draw a line and say, look, 15 people is just too many. 5 may not be enough, right?
Unless they can be part of the committee, but the committee also consists of a chair, a vice chair, organized officers that conduct the meeting so that it doesn't get derailed.
Yes.
But it still allows people to participate. I hate telling people no. It's like with youth council, we don't have a limit on how many kids can be involved in youth council, but we do have a structure. We have a mayor, we have a city manager. We have a structure so that the meetings are conducted, reasonably well. People have to go through a process to add comments and things like that. I think then it would still allow people to participate and be a part of it, but there would be elected officers that would conduct and control the meeting so it doesn't get derailed.
Good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't ever want to tell a volunteer no either, unless there's some compelling reason to do so. But we love our volunteers.
But we do go through a process with youth council to where they still have to apply and go through an interview process. We've never told anybody no, but I guess if you did that and there is a really strongly compelling reason to tell somebody.
You pled guilty to a parking ticket?
Probably not super compelling. But I don't know what the guidelines would be on that, but we could do that process if council wants. It's time, it's a lengthy process, but I hate telling people no that are willing to serve on something that benefits our community and allow them to have input, as long as there's not a meeting where everybody is talking over each other.
Yeah, an ad hoc group versus a formalized structure of leadership for each group. I support that.
Have we given you enough unclear direction that you can maybe take
Right, we
something?
don't want to forget that Councilman Henderson is on the phone.
Oh.
So we don't want to forget him up
I've
there
got
in
it.
the clouds. And Councilmember Smith, if you have any feedback.
Yeah, I don't want to turn away any volunteer that's willing to serve. That being said, I think that, there has to be some evaluation, potentially on a committee by committee basis, on what it is we're trying to accomplish. So, take Healthy Harriman, for example. We have a number of our residents that are on that, but we have those that are outside of that. And that's because they bring a particular expertise to it. So again, I don't want to bump people that are from our own community that are willing to serve just to get the expertise in there. That being said, I think that, again, more structure to some of these committees where there is a designated chair and a co-chair and those types of things where some of that, more of that responsibility and organization is pushed to some of the individuals to take some of that workload and management off of staff and potentially even the council members that sit on these. So again, that there's more productivity that comes out of the group because there's more, we've allowed them more ownership in that group as well. So,
We can
like I
bring-
say, I don't want to turn anybody away that's willing to serve.
I agree. And we can bring back several different options from that might work, might fit, and you might come up with a mishmash of all of them, who knows? But we'll work on that in the next couple months and bring that back for maybe 2022. I can't believe I'm already talking about 2022, but I am. But for this year, staff would recommend that we just proceed as normal, the way things are done now, get our volunteer committees up and running and going for the year. So, do you have any questions?
I
or-
would be okay with that, but I would ask that we designate a chair and a vice chair on each of those
Yeah.
committees.
We can do that.
That way there is a little bit of structure and there's some ownership, so.
The way it's currently written, those committees designate those positions. So we'll just proceed that way, if that's
Yes.
acceptable. And I had one more thing I was going to say. OHV, I need some direction on how we want to proceed with that. I can work with UTV Utah and Mr. Boring to kind of figure out how to put that together over the next couple months, if that's acceptable to the council, and come back to you with that.
I support that.
I do too. I think that he's going to offer a lot of good resources for us and stuff like that.
Agreed.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Councilman Henderson, did you have any comments that, on that item? Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to item 2.3, Impact Fee Audit. Blake. I'm timing it. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. Okay, so this is just a kind of a follow-up of an ongoing discussion we've been having. This was last discussed in July of 2020. And then since that time, we had a breakdown on the CDA analysis, if you remember that. So it's all kind of tied together and kind of one led to the next. So with that, I just kind of wanted to give a little background in case anybody from the public is really bored late one night and they want to learn about impact fees, kind of give a little impact fees 101. And these are similar to the slides that were provided in July. But some of the key points we just want to point out on this is impact fees are a way to pay for infrastructure. Not the way, but they're a way. And so it's not paid by residents directly. It's paid by developers or builders, whoever's building the home. And it requires the developer to pay the proportion of their impact to the infrastructure needs. So, for example, if they're building 100 homes and the road already can carry, 70 homes worth of traffic, and they have to upsize the road, then they have to pay for that piece that they impact. If the whole road has to be repaired, the city has to cover the other piece. Say it's 20/80 split or something like that.
Blake, can I just make a quick comment again as we're talking about impact fees 101, is that these fees only deal with the new impact created by development. So it's not fees assessed to existing residents, it's the impact that's generated by new development
That's correct.
and the people that come with that new development.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, and I think I'll have a few more slides here that clarify that a bit more.
Thank you.
But that's a key thing to point out. New development and the portion that can be charged is what's inside the city, development in the city boundaries. Okay, so next slide is just kind of what are impact fees, what they're not. They're not for maintenance. They can't solve our existing problems, and they're really not a perfect solution to funding infrastructure. Like I said, they're a way to do it, but they're not the way, and I don't know if there is the way. Lottery, maybe that's the way, I don't know, but so next slide. Got to make sure my paper keeps up with the slideshow here. And so the the detail, just some more facts on this. The details of a study is kind of what this kind of points out here, is the study would analyze an existing system, such as a water system or transportation system, and then they go through and identify the projects that are needed over the next 10, 20, 30 years, whatever your build-out is. And then they apply scenarios. So transportation is the one I keep referring to because that's the one that we've been working on the most, well, I've had the most impact with. And so they'll look at all these different scenarios, like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and put projects to each one of those scenarios. And that's based on what you're projecting for development, which is kind of a tough thing to project on. But then they take it and identify projects for each one of those scenarios, associate costs from all those analyses, and then distribute the costs based on what they're allowed to distribute the cost to by state law. And so that's kind of the background on how a study gets done, and then you can kind of see the bullet points here talk about, you know, how it gets adopted and when the fee can be charged. And this is the part where I think most of the confusion lies between everyone here is, yeah, we collect the fees, then how do we spend them? You know, how do they get from the city's accounts into wherever they go to? So there's typically two ways to do this. The city can do a project, and that's a standard, go out, design it, bid it out, build it, pay the contractor directly. The other one is the one that the whole point of this discussion tonight is development comes in, they need a road built, the city doesn't have the money to build it. So we exact the developer essentially to build this road or this water line, storm drain pipe, and then we enter into a reimbursement agreement with that developer, and we pay them back impact fees. Hopefully, those developments generate enough impact fee to pay that developer back and make them whole on their cost, their portion of that upsized system. If it's not, then we have to start looking outside of their development and bringing other people's impact fees in to pay for that improvement.
I want to ask just one question, if I might, right here, and this might be something Chase can answer too, is how many of the reimbursement agreements that we have existing have limitations on how much the developer can be reimbursed as it relates to the impact fees that are actually collected?
Every single impact fee
As a
agreement,
maximum.
or a reimbursement agreement has a maximum amount.
No, meaning, I understand there's a maximum amount of reimbursement, but how many of those are tied to the maximum, that the maximum is tied to the amount of impact fees actually collected? Does that make sense?
So-
If we're only going to collect $1 million in impact fees from a property, but we need to reimburse a developer $5 million, there's a problem there.
So some of the older ones that are closed out were kind of open-ended. Some of the ones that have been lingering for a while are still a little open-ended on that. And I think developers are expecting more money than what'll be coming in that collection area that's outlined. Some of the more recent agreements that we've done, we've actually went through and calculated and figured out where we're at and tried to come together on it and say, okay, we're not gonna meet this, where are we gonna bring the rest in? So I guess my answer is kind of all over the board on that, so.
And that's kind of what I suspected. I'm glad we're getting better as time has gone along, right?
We are getting better, and actually this whole process, I've been meeting with Justin and Jonathan and Chase quite a bit on it. And we've come up with some good ideas on how to nail it down even better so that we will not be overcommitted and that we'll be dialed in on them, so.
And that's one of the things that we've done with reimbursement agreements going forward, is to say, you get up to a maximum, but you may only also get a minimum depending upon the amount of impact fees that are collected from this area and then defining what that area is, so that the developer takes a risk, essentially, of saying, geez, I hope I get all of my
Yeah.
impact fees.
Yeah, I'll have a follow-up question to this as we get into some of the analysis you did regarding where we have either historically paid out more or where we are currently overcommitted compared to what we're going to receive, so.
Okay. I'm anxiously awaiting those questions.
No,
when we
you're
get there. Okay, so that was the one slide that I really wanted to spend a few, a little bit of time on, and I'm glad it sparked some questions, because I think that's always been some of the question is, now you got the money, how do you spend it? I think the public also is a little confused on what are these reimbursement agreements? What do they mean? So hopefully that clears up anything there as to how we get into these agreements and why they're even a thing that exists. Some other cities do things like pioneering agreements where you don't collect the impact fee, you just, the next developer down the road pays the, however much that first developer paid to that developer. Those get kind of hard to collect on, and agreements get lost over time, and sometimes things don't develop linearly. So this guy, then this guy, and that guy, doesn't work that way. So that's why I think we've steered away from those in the past, and so those are the two types of, you know, developers paying the fees scenarios that I know of. So as we move on here, see, that didn't go anywhere. So these are the main infrastructure systems that we collect impact fees for: transportation, water, storm drain, and parks. And then this gives a breakdown of how much each fee is based on, you know, single-family house or multifamily. Water's a little tricky. It has tables where it's based on meter size and irrigatable area and things like that. So we weren't able to put a number on that. But this kind of gives you an idea where we're talking, how much money for houses and things. And then these studies obviously get updated every now and then. We should be doing them about every 2 to 3 years as we're growing, or we'll end up getting behind, or more behind, because I don't think, after going through this analysis, I don't think impact fees will ever get you ahead. They're just set up to always be a little bit behind, and always a little bit less than what you need.
Isn't that awesome?
Thank you, legislature, but that's just the way it is. So anyway, we'll move on to the breakdown on the analysis here. So I broke them into 3 different categories. This is the first one. These are closed out impact fee reimbursement agreements. And so the closed out means that they are projects that are complete and all the reimbursement's been made. We've went through, verified them. We noticed that in the past, we just kind of said, okay, they're done, and then that was it. And so we've talked with Chase a little bit about doing a final letter and an agreement, or what's it called again, a satisfaction agreement.
Depending upon if there's an amount left to pay, or if we've gone over, doing what's called a satisfaction agreement, just saying, we had a previous arrangement, but whatever that was, our current agreement is that we're square, is essentially what it constitutes.
It essentially closes it out, so we can put them in the archive folder, never look at them again. But we were able to pull them back up, and you can kind of see there's some discrepancies between these. And so the transportation, if you remember, 2007 through 2009 was interesting. We had some projects that were under reimbursement agreement. I think a couple of those projects went south, and so the city came in and finished some of those projects out, and those were the agreements that I saw here that caused that discrepancy, where we actually reimbursed less because the developer went away, or the project, you know, went away for a while. Water and storm drain, there was really no smoking gun. There was just a couple of them that were a little over, and after you get about 5 or 6 agreements on these capital projects that go a little bit over, it just bounced somewhere over, somewhere under. It just balanced out as over. I think one's like 2.5%, 3% over. One's like 5 or 6% over. So,
But why are we ever paying over?
if the developer ended up running into something like, say they're digging in the ground, they run into a bunch of rock they weren't expecting, and you know that was part of the project, then they would come in. And I believe those were brought up with separate budget opening items as they came through, and so those were budgeted and went out. Paid a little bit more just because projects have change orders, and so we try to avoid those, but some of these were older ones too that I'm not aware of what really went
They
down or
predate
how.
us all.
Sorry, what was that?
They predate us all.
I think just about everyone, yep. And then parks, the closed out ones there's such a discrepancy was because Arches Park was one that we ended up doing as a city and not having the developer do, which was a pretty expensive reimbursement agreement. And then there was another one, the White Barn. That reimbursement agreement got closed out because that White Barn got removed. So those were 2 agreements that really put a dent in what was actually reimbursed.
There's a part about this too that, of this analysis that I'm questioning, and maybe you have this easily at hand, or it's in another slide and I didn't catch it when I was reading it. But we know what's reimbursable and what was reimbursed, but we don't know what the actual cost to the city was minus the impact fees. Does that make sense?
So any general fund dollars that were spent on
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
As far as I know, none were spent on any of these reimbursement agreements. They were always impact fee funds that were paid back.
Okay.
That,
That's correct,
okay.
because we don't, impact fees are not by area, they're over the whole
So we haven't used any general funds yet, but eventually there's a place where, as you said, we're always a little behind, we're always a little short, where those are gonna stack up, and there's a place where the impact fees run out, and there's still reimbursements to be made. That gap is something I'm trying to get my hands around as well, so.
Yep.
Which is on the.
And we're going to get to that in just a second, I think. I think this next slide will kind of carry us there. This shows our open impact fee, or our open reimbursement agreements. These are reimbursement agreements that we've executed. Some of the projects are done, some are in process, some haven't started yet. And so this shows, you know, how much we're obligated to spend, how much we've reimbursed, and what's remaining on these reimbursements. And in your packet, I included some spreadsheets that kind of broke it down so you can kind of get into the details of it a bit more. But you can see like some of these, and so Wasatch South Hills had an agreement for water and storm drain. It didn't identify a maximum amount. It was kind of an interesting agreement. It said, submit your invoices and that'll identify the maximum amount, then we'll pay on those verified invoices. And so to date, nothing has been submitted on that one reimbursement agreement. They have a different water reimbursement agreement, and that was the tank. And if you remember, they did a 60-40 split with Rosecrest, and that one's all executed and being paid back. And
Are there sunset clauses on any of these ones that are still out there floating?
sorry,
Are there sunset clauses on any of these that are out there floating?
no. there's
So
no
we could be 20 years down the road and they could submit us receipts and all of a sudden we are in the hole for $1 million of funds.
They need to submit their invoices. We're on top of that, about getting invoices when things are done. Typically, I don't see invoices come in more than a few months, because a contractor or a developer wants that money back up front. There's no, I don't know, they might be digging through their sock drawer someday and find, oh, there's an old road invoice that I didn't submit, but haven't had that happen yet. So they're typically on top of when they want their reimbursements back. and
But
get
so,
them
so
submitted.
there is this Wasatch South Hills agreement, though, that we're not quite sure how much it's going to be or exactly when that might come due.
So the storm drain portion of it, have not installed any storm drain that's impact fee eligible yet. They have some planned, but it hasn't been installed yet. So,
Okay.
so some of these projects, like I said, nothing's been done on them. Some of them have a lot. And so, yeah, that's where that one's at. I don't know if the water's gotten anything installed to date,
Okay.
part of that agreement. So I think everything was covered underneath their major water infrastructure agreement with the tank and the transmission line. So maybe this was just like a belt and suspenders on their side for reimbursements, and we haven't gotten the invoices for that one yet.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. And then I just wanted to point out the largest obligations we have hanging out there for each one of these systems. So the transportation is 118th and 126th. Neither one of those facilities has been built yet. So that's one that, could end up being a city project, and then that obligation to reimburse could go away and we'd just pay for that. We've also, continually asked for money from Wasatch Front Regional Council sources, Salt Lake County legislature for roads such as that. So every time one of those funding opportunities comes up and gets funded, then we can, kick our impact fees, make more use out of them that way. Water, the 4000 West Broomview Drive, that's actually percentage-wise a small amount compared to the overall obligations. I don't know if that one's actually entirely correct, because we have a more recent agreement This presentation bullet point is a little bit outdated on that. There's actually a East Harriman Water Improvement and Juniper Canyon Waterline Reimbursement Agreement that just was recently executed. So it's a more obligation than that, and it's underway. And those projects, I think, are partially eligible for CDA funds as well. So remember, we can offset that way too. Storm drain, the Rose Basin improvements with the Juniper Estates project is our biggest obligation there. And that is that one constructed? It's the Juniper Estates one. Okay. That one is constructed, so we're obligated to reimburse on that one. And then the Teton Jackson Park, the park up there, that one's not constructed yet. And I think are we doing that one?
Has that already removed the barn?
That does not have a barn.
But I'm saying, is that $1 million that you have there, is that?
Just for the
No,
park.
this
That's
was
just
the
the park.
actual park improvements.
Just the
The open space that was associated with that barn got incorporated into this park more in the central portion of the development.
Yeah, I remember. They promised the moon on that.
This amount will probably mostly cover the asphalt trails throughout. We're in design right now, so we don't have any solid numbers on that area yet.
Are we doing that as a city project?
No.
Okay. So we'll have reimbursement and
So I have a question on your opening current ones. You have a maximum reimbursable amount, and I can see your information about the IFFP was referenced to determine those things. The question I really have is, I know we have certain areas, like if you calculate it based on, okay, we're going to have 20 homes in here, so here's the total amount of an impact fee for this area, and then they get going through design, and now all of a sudden they can only do 15 homes. So now we didn't collect that. How much of that calculation was in there? Because I know the Rosecrest thing I hear constantly, well, yeah, but they have more homes than they could ever build, right? So if we calculated what was going to be our maximum reimbursable amount, we're going to be way short. And so my question is, how much of that has been calculated into this?
so in these, it's pretty set in the reimbursement. Once we get to the point of writing the reimbursement agreement, it's less guessing.
Okay.
Now, when you're doing the IFFP and the master plan, there's a lot of guessing in that. And you're basically using existing zoning and general plan. And so you're taking large areas, and there's a lot of guessing that goes into those things. Those studies are, several months long.
That's it. Everything's zoned A1 now.
Yeah, so it's, these ones though, as we look at the agreements that are executed, they're set on the number of lots for those things.
Thank you.
Especially like Teton and Jackson, they have their lots set. They're gonna build every one of those lots, and we'll come in
Okay.
right where we want with those. So the last one, that was a good segue into the last one, the future impact fee projects. This is where our crystal ball gets a little cloudy, because there's a lot of guesses. There's council decisions, there's planning commission decisions that go along that influence everything that develops in the future. There's market decisions, market things that happen that push this. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is we do this study and we plan projects out for build out, but then when you dial back in and do the impact fee portion of it, you can only look at the next 10 years, and then you can only plan on the next 6 years legally. And so that tells me we need to be doing these studies every couple of years. The good thing is these studies can be paid for with impact fees. So you can plan on doing them every 2 or 3 years if you're a fast-growing community, and that'll keep you up ahead of the curve on bringing in funds and knowing what's going on. Our struggle has always been, we get an impact fee study started, and then we annex property in, and then we have to go back and restart. And so at some point you draw your line in the sand and say, we got to go from here. And no matter what happens, annexations, we finish that one out and start the new one right after.
So have we made that a practice, or is that something we're making a practice?
That's something we made a practice about 4 or 5 years ago.
So we're
And
pretty
so-
new into it.
Yeah, and so transportation, for example, we finished the master plan, but we didn't follow through with the impact fee analysis because we were anxious for the general plan to get done. And then we'd do the impact fee analysis with that. We didn't want to do an impact fee and drop it and then raise it and have all sorts of difficulty, because they get challenged legally by the Home Builders Association.
Plus, they've got to be costly to keep doing them. So even though you can use impact fee money, there's an expense
Yeah,
with that.
exactly. There's a cost there. So as you can see on this one, there are a lot of projects out there for our future impact fee projects that we don't have agreements for right now. And the parks one is probably the most staggering, but it's not one of the infrastructure improvements that is like a service that you have to turn your faucet on and get water to come out or storm drain down the pipe. So I think there's an ability to kind of guide what that really is and not overextend ourselves.
Yeah, that's really a pie in the sky number there. That's all the swimming pools, everything that you saw in the Parks Master
Because this
Plan.
is all of the things that they, like, and this includes things when, for example, Teton came in, they were showing in that park, in Jackson Park, whatever it's called, a soccer field and amphitheater and so many pretty pictures, right? That at the time I called out was probably not, wasn't realistic that we would be paying for it if that happens. So that's all included in that number, correct?
Everything you could ever possibly imagine.
Yeah. So,
Not be spending that much money on.
so that $1 million that we have for that park is going to put some asphalt trails down and
A little bit more than that, but
a few other things, but we're not going to get an amphitheater. Okay.
You're gonna have to plan
Impact fees are
you're gonna have to plan a couple more bake sales, I think, to make up the difference.
Those better be some good cookies. So you can see that, the impact fee eligible portion of the project costs is quite low compared to the actual costs. And a lot of that is because we have a lot of existing deficiencies for like 6,000 West, Main Street. So we're only able to attribute a portion. Another portion or contributing factor to that is some of the growth. And remember, our transportation plan was planning on the old plan for everything west of Harriman. And so it was planning on just normal traffic coming down. So the road widths and stuff weren't much more than what Harriman was doing. But with no additional homes to the west, we can't apply that impact fee to those future developments. So we're building the roads regardless of whatever development comes in outside the city contributing to our roads. And so we're not able to collect the impact fees for it. And so that.
We didn't have that conversation 2 years ago at all.
So that's one thing where you can, see where there's some differences there. We got a lot of existing deficiency for these things. And so that makes it difficult. That's where we keep applying for funds.
Just out of curiosity, the previous Salt Lake County Council and their approval of the development to the west entitled that property, but as part of that master development agreement, the developer of that property is supposed to pay impact fees for projects outside of their project area that would impact traffic down the line. Have we contemplated what those fees might be, how much that would be, how that could be applied to some of these shortfalls?
A great question. And I'm not really familiar with the wording in the agreement, how that is spelled out. I remember them saying they're responsible to pay their portion. I don't know if they called it an impact fee. I don't know how the money goes from one entity to the other.
I can tell you after reading that agreement, I can't tell you either.
But what I can say is that our master plan, we drew the line in the sand as to our old master plan with the old layout. And so when we do our update after the general plan gets adopted, we'll update it with the new layout. And then we'll be able to clearly see, here's what it was before, here's what it was after. How we get that, I don't know yet. But we'll be able to describe what it is and define what it is.
I'm sure the county will generously take care of all of that for us.
Everything we've done with the county for funding, it's been, we have to upfront the cost and then we apply it or get reimbursement from them on it. So, are there any other questions on this one?
How liberal have they been with their reimbursements?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Sorry. How liberal have they been with their reimbursements?
If it's budgeted, it comes, it's a time thing. It takes, 3 to 6 months to process the invoices and get everything done,
Good.
which it's just money we spend up front. And sometimes if you're doing a, $3, $4, $5 million project, that's impossible to do.
Sure.
Thank you, Blake. This is very good information.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation,
Wait, I
Blake.
do, there's one overarching question here that it's partly this answers some of it. Some of this is Alan to answer, right? And there's just a bigger question here, right? And I don't ask this question, there's no one to blame. This city's got a 20-year history. There's been a lot of people in these chairs. There's been a lot of decisions made that appeared appropriate at the time, that maybe in hindsight weren't right. This is no blame, but there's a question of what is this unfunded liability that we have, right? There's somewhere there's a shortfall, and to me the most of the shortfalls have been taken care of by, well, we're going to get with the new building that happens, that'll pay back the stuff that we've built, right? So as long as we keep building, we'll keep getting impact fee money, we'll keep getting the one-time money to help offset those shortfalls. And I understand that, and I understand why that was done. But eventually there's a place where those don't come in anymore, and there are things to still be funded. I'm curious, and I think the other members of the council are curious, is how can we quantify that amount? How can we identify what that is? There's this cloud that's out there somewhere in the future, right? That's gonna rain on our parade. And I just don't know if it's gonna be a light drizzle or it's gonna be one of those 100-year flood events, right? And I think that's important as we're talking about budget questions and capital projects and all kinds of things coming down the pipe that we've been talking about, that understanding the scope of that unfunded liability is really, really important, at least from my consideration. It has a strong bearing on some decisions we may need to make in this budget cycle. So I don't know that this answered all of that. I think it gave a hint on some of it. But I guess there's a question is, how much does the current general plan for the current city boundaries of Harriman leave us short compared to what may come with annexation things? Does that make sense? Is there enough building inside the current boundaries of the city of Harriman to support the liabilities that are coming? Or are we anticipating paying those liabilities with future growth outside of our city that may or may not happen?
Okay. From this
That's a long
analysis,
question.
from this analysis, I think we're comfortable with our current obligations for our existing agreements, but I don't know how much further we can go transportation-wise. I think water and storm drain have been set up so that they can fund themselves okay. I think water's probably set up the best. And storm drain's difficult because it's based on acreage and it only pays for pipes. And so there's not much left to go on storm drain in the city because most of the development is along channels. I think the biggest piece was the Mountain Ridge storm drain, and that's all underway and in the agreement. Scared me there, huh? Snuck up.
I want to partially answer that question too, because you cross channels.
It's a whole big question, I understand, so.
First of all, he's talking impact fees.
Sure.
Building permits are general fund.
Right.
Okay, it's a completely different thing. So when you're looking at what we're doing, I think that there's going to be a shortfall because these impact fees are not 100%. We're going to have to come general fund.
Sure.
So,
That's,
you know.
that how much we have to take out of general fund, that's where I'm trying to get to, right?
Well, in his spreadsheet, we can easily come up with that number and I can email it to you because his spreadsheet shows the amount of the project. It also shows how much is attributed to the impact fees. So the
The
other
problem
half-
is the easy answer is a very scary answer.
Okay, yeah. Well, we can, from his spreadsheet, he's got that information.
Right.
We just need to boil it down for you, and I can do that right away. But when you're talking about building permits, paying things, to me, that's where we've got our big shortfall. If you look at what's happening with our building permits, they're coming down
Right.
at almost the exact same rate that our taxes are coming up. So we're not losing money because of a reduction of building permits, but we have more general fund projects than I envision at the current point being able to do. But,
Yeah.
you know, the impact fees seem to be fairly reasonable. But, you know, when you're talking about, and you ask the question about what if the houses change? Well, when you're doing an impact fee study, they don't even look at houses. They consider what they expect the population to be, and it's based on population. They boil that back to dwelling units. So they're looking at the proposal of the whole city. And, you know, a few years ago, I was going through all the impact fee studies, and every one of them had a different population estimate. They're all done at the same time, but by different consultants with different populations that gives you a different amount. That has been mostly smoothed out at this point. But you're looking at, on the impact fee side, what's the population going to be versus these projects?
Right.
Now, if you got a project that's 70% eligible, 30% of it's going to have to be funded with our other funds somehow.
Right. And so I apologize for the cross-channel question, right? Because
Right.
so my assumption, and here's the logic in this question. So the impact fee shortage, right, for these projects has to be covered through other funds, right? Some of that will come through grants or money from other sources or things, right? Some of that shortfall will be taken care of. But there's a remaining shortfall that's going to have to be paid for by the city. And that is paid for out of our general funds. The building permits are part of what goes into that general fund budget. So that's where I'm making the relationship between as these things slow down and this thing's there's a
We can identify that.
trying to quantify that a little bit. And I know it's a little bit, you know, finger in the wind here, but
We can quantify that, but that number is going to change by his proposal of doing a new study every few years.
sure.
Because every few years, you look at those numbers again, and you look at the population, and you come up with a new number. And that's supposed to try and pick that shortage up. If you go too long in between those, then that's when you run into the shortage that you're looking at.
Right.
If you're going more often, you should be picking up those changes, and it should settle in total. But the piece that's missing is if we got 20% that's coming out of general fund and 80% out of impact fees, that's where I see the real problem is what we've got to fund ourselves.
Exactly.
I agree, but I would like to, because I assume part of that calculation, because we have this on phase one, $175 million in parks. I like to see realistic numbers. I don't want to see niceties. I don't want to see, we want everyone to have this, we want everyone to have that. Do some realistic, bare bones, this is what we have to provide critical services to our community, not niceties.
Okay, now, that's another thing, though.
I was like, I'm not sure that
The
staff can do
things that
that.
qualify for the impact fees are clearly defined with the amounts,
Right.
other than parks. Every other one says, these are the projects you're building, and it's going to cost this much.
Okay, perfect. So,
So those won't change.
okay, so just the parks thing is,
I just want to caution on trying to have staff come up with a bare bones list of items for that number. I'm not sure that's necessarily staff's.
well, I guess, Alan, it's kind of already accessed, really, right? You've created it, because those have to happen, and it's only the parks that's the.
So you're asking what we are required
We
to
have
by
discretion
ordinance.
over the parks
Yeah,
part
just
somewhat.
wanted-
yeah.
So
I don't
what
wanna-
is our discretion, what is not our discretion? That's what you're at, okay.
And I think like Alan said, the transportation, water, and storm drain, that's based off of
Services.
an engineering analysis
Right.
that you build this many houses, you have to put a pipe that big in the ground.
Right,
That's
good.
what it is.
Perfect.
The parks is just a little bit fuzzier, and if you read through all the reports, the impact fee studies and the master plans, you can tell that the parks is fuzzier. It just, because if you, they just go by how many acres of open space you need per 1,000 people.
Yeah, but to be fair, it's fuzzier, but there is still some study, there is some science coming behind this magic number here, right?
Yep,
It's not just
absolutely.
completely
It's just, yeah,
Do you,
it's not a road or a storm or a
Right.
water pipe.
do you understand what the council's asking for information?
I think so. I think Alan and I will work together and we'll get the.
Did
those
you have any
answers.
more items you needed to present to us?
Nope.
Any further questions from the council?
Sorry, yeah, we're
This is
over.
awesome. Thank you for taking the
you.
time to do this. That's
We're
a
gonna,
lot.
we're gonna go ahead and move on because we are
Sorry,
almost
yeah.
20 minutes behind. So with that, what I would do is I would accept a motion to shortly take a brief adjournment and then move into our general meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we temporarily recess our city council work meeting to convene in our general meeting after a short 5-minute break.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are temporarily adjourned. We will begin at 7:25.
Have you had your meeting with Alan to discuss?
Not yet. I was gonna probably do it on the 22nd.
Clint, have you had your, so that's where this question comes from, right?
No, it's a fair question.
He was showing me stuff for that.
I know it's coming. I know it's coming. Awesome. Thank you for waiting. Appreciate it. We welcome out to our general meeting of the Harriman City Council for February 10th, 2021. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. It's going to be led by a member of our Youth Council. Chloe, if you come to the podium, please.
All right, repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the participation in our meetings. We'll move on to item 4.2, City Council comments and recognitions. Okay. If we don't have any, we'll move on to item 5, public comment. Audience members may bring any item to the City Council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this meeting will also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the City Council may submit a comment by emailing recorder@harriman.org or by visiting harriman.org/agenda-and-minutes, where there will be a link to join the electronic meeting to submit a written comment. Your statement will be read to the public record. So with that, we will open the public comment portion of our meeting. If you have a comment you'd like to make, please come to the podium at this time. Okay, seeing none, I will turn to our recorder. We have no electronic, so we will close the public comment portion of our meeting. We will move on to item 6, which is City Council Board and Committee reports.
So I can report on the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. Again, I'm glad that we got a few storms here recently, and we have a bunch coming, I think, this weekend, which is great. They had a little impact. I think we went from 67% on one of our drainages to about 70%. But because of the lack of saturation in the soil, we have to hit about 110 to 120% of normal to really be back to normal with our snowpack and our water supply. So whatever you're doing, keep asking for more snow because we really, really need it. The likelihood of getting that, we only have about a 10% chance of even hitting that at this point because one of our kind of meters is the snow level at Trial Lake and the snow level at the Beaver Divide. And the Beaver Divide snow level right now is actually historically the lowest it's been in these records. So we really need snow. The district, again, has done a great job of planning for the future. We don't anticipate having any water restrictions this coming year, but if we don't start getting water, we'll end up having those at some point. So we really need water, and the best way to help that is to continue to practice conservation. So we just would really encourage people to do that. We just went through our public water systems monitoring report, and we had 0 issues. We had a total points of 0, which is what you want to get. It's kind of like golf, a lower score is better. I've never mastered that, but that's what they tell me. So, so that's good. We're doing a good job with water quality, and we're hitting right in where we need to be with the state water quality requirements. And then I am assuming that staff knows this, but I will just put this out there because one of the benefits that we've had, we were the first member agency to adopt the water efficiency standards. And so part of that kind of benefit is access to some funding from the water district. It's about $50,000, and it kind of opens up a little more of what the grant money can be applied to. Justin's nodding his head, which I pretty much already knew he would be, but it's great because we can include that for staffing and computer software and things like that so that we can really help absorb the impacts of the cost to implement those standards. So I'll be reaching out. I also represent Riverton and Bluffdale in this position, and so I'll be reaching out to them to make sure that their cities understand that so that we can encourage not only ourselves, which we did a great job, but our neighbors to implement these standards. And the district is happy to help with you know, with those grants to help soften the cost of implementing those standards. And that's kind of my report.
Just from the Association of Municipal Councils meeting, we had a really interesting, about hour-long conversation about ranked choice voting. There were, Sherry Swenson was on the call, representative who's been largely responsible for the bill that allowed this to take place in certain municipalities. I'm going to sum up two things that kind of came out of that discussion I thought were really interesting. Number one is that every voting system or method of voting has some shortcomings or flaws in it. The current system that we have does have some issues that ranked choice voting tries to address. Ranked choice voting does also introduce some new problems. In summary, I think this is going to be an issue that's going to come before the council sometime this year. Salt Lake County is still working on some software updates and testing to see if it's something they're going to even be able to accommodate in this election or not. That might have a lot of bearing on what we do, but I think it's imperative that everybody understand the pros and cons of our existing voting system and ranked choice voting system, so that it's not one of those, oh, look at all the great things that this does, but without understanding some of the shortfalls it has as well. So it was a really interesting discussion to hear some of the municipalities that are doing it to try and save costs or potentially save costs to avoid essentially a primary or runoff type of elections. But outside of the cost savings, there seems to be a lot of confusion and the obligations it would create around voter education. So just as we move forward and we're going to get information from, that's what I was asking Jackie about before the meeting here. Eventually there's going to be a presentation that Jackie's going to make to us regarding a deadline that we're going to have to make a decision. And so I just encourage everyone, public and members of the council, to get more educated on some of the issues and pros and cons associated with ranked choice voting, so we can have a more robust discussion when that comes up. So anyway, that's just a summary of an hour-long conversation. So.
All right, thank you.
I don't have a particular report to make, but I do have I guess a comment as it relates to our current hiring committee for our new city manager. And I apologize, Wendy, if this was something that you were going to bring up at a different time, but again, I just wanted to be able to make a comment to it. I just wanted to be able to address the feedback we got from our consultant as it relates to the desire for multiple members of the council to participate in that, and in fact have to make it an open meeting. We got some feedback via Travis, our HR manager, last week that came from the consultant. And again, since I was on that meeting again last week with the consultant, had the opportunity to ask a few more questions and get a little more feedback from them. So really, I just wanted to make a comment that, I had some concern about it before. I just want to express I continue to have some concern about allowing more council to participate in that than, that constitutes a quorum or more, requiring that to be a noticed open meeting. There was a lot of concern, I know, that had been given back to our consultant with regard from the candidates themselves with regards to the potential of having that being in an open meeting, and even discuss the challenges that would present itself of trying to go through and just kind of make the information discussed in that meeting generic enough, because I believe, as our consultant put it last week, they felt like as you start to get into that vetting process, that there potentially is enough details presented on certain candidates that some might be able to identify who those are. Again, I just wanted to bring that up and voice my concern again of doing that. We've hired a consultant to really get us through that vetting process, to where then us as a full council can meet with those candidates that have been vetted and deemed really qualified, and appropriate to be considered for the position where all council can be involved in that process. But I do have concern about us proceeding in the manner that had been previously discussed because of those concerns expressed by the consultant and shared with us. So that's the comment I want to make, but I didn't know, Wendy, if there was going to be an opportunity for further discussion on that.
So I know the consultant is going to address it again tomorrow. We have set up for a closed meeting during that time period tomorrow, so we won't be in an open meeting when we discuss those candidates if we do. One thing that has been kind of unclear amongst staff at direction from the council is who's involved in those closed meetings. I know Councilmember Shields has voiced his opinion to me, but we'd like some clarity as to who is involved in this subcommittee process. So I know all of council is. We also know that Chase and Travis from HR will be. Is there anyone else that you want involved on that process?
Personally, I want you involved.
Can I just make a comment to that? I know why you're saying that. The only reason that I would, I guess, raise a concern to that is because at the end of the day, Wendy is now going to have to report to this person. And in fact, Chase is going to have to report to this person. And so I think that that's all part of a very good, robust discussion of who, because again, the more I've thought about it, again, we have some great people in here and we want to be able to pick their brains and utilize their talents when it comes to that process. But at the same time, at the end of the day, now these people who would be part of selecting that person now have to report to that person. And I don't want to create any situations that may inhibit the work that we need to be done once that person gets in place. So those are just some of the thoughts I have. I think Travis, as our HR representative, is absolutely appropriate, but I think we really need to discuss, again, what we think is appropriate, and again, depending on where us as a council completely engage in that process and those types of things, because I do think that there's been some clarity needed on that process.
That's a fair point.
And like I say, I would love to have the expertise of so many of staff in there, but I don't want to create a situation again to where we have our staff that are really kind of help vet these people in terms, and now they have to turn around and report to this person once they, that position is selected. So.
Mr. Mayor, if I might add to Clint's comments there, that I think there is a point in this process where a 360 interview, if you will, that's current vernacular, where the expertise and knowledge of staff members in certain departments is going to be a real important contribution to that final vetting, that interview process at the end. But I think to Clint's point, the picking and choosing of the candidates that we really want to get into that process with, I think largely lies at the responsibility of the council, and to agree with Clint said about not wanting people to pick their boss per se, right? I think that's really at the...
No, I think the points were well taken, and I am comfortable with that recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that.
Okay, so just to clarify. Chase, yes.
Yes.
HR, yes.
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 Perfect.
And
Okay.
council.
And council, yes. So tomorrow, what we'll proceed with is an open meeting. Councilmember Shields has said that he would be here at the Anchor location to facilitate that. If we do have a quorum, we'll move into a closed meeting. If we do not have a quorum, we'll just meet.
Because it's
And
not
it
an
won't
open
be
meeting.
recorded, it won't be,
I will not be there, so.
yeah, and I've indicated that I have a conflict because I have a board meeting at 9 o'clock. If I can get him to talk faster, I'll be in there by 9:30. If not, I might have to join a little bit late. Okay.
And so I think that, Clint, are you going to join tomorrow, or do you have a conflict?
I'm planning on joining.
Okay, so I'll be here. Clint will join. I think Jared's intent is to join. He's got some health issues that may prevent him. I'll let Jared speak to his intention tomorrow. So we may end up just not having to have the, recording and open meeting stuff that'll give us some flexibility, as Clint had hit it. But if Jared does come, we have a quorum, we can move into closed. So.
Yeah, and we'll just continue to be flexible as we can moving
Got it.
forward.
All right, unless there's any further comments or committee reports, we'll move on to item 7.1, discussion and consideration of an ordinance adopting an impact fee facility plan, impact fee analysis, and impact fee enactment that imposes a storm drain impact fee, providing for the calculation and collection of such fees, and providing for appeal, accounting, severability of the same, and other related matters. Jonathan. I think Jonathan had some, is he here?
This is really my item.
I was like,
It's
because
got him
this
on
very
there.
much sounded
I
like
was
it
gonna
was,
let him sweat for a little bit, but he wasn't even in here.
it very
feel
much
that
sounded like that
stress.
was written by an attorney.
Yeah,
Blake, if you could just text Jonathan though and let him know we're waiting on him.
Yeah.
Just,
great. I'd love to see his face when that hits, but no, this is my item. As you recall, just the procedural history of this, Jonathan had Bowen Collins present this for the first time, I believe, January 13th in a work meeting. This update to our impact fees, as we've been so well educated on tonight, that was the initial impact fees facilities plan, as well as the impact fee analysis that Bowen and Collins had prepared for the city. The public hearing, which is required by state statute on the IFFP and the enactment, which is on for discussion and action tonight, was held on January 27th, which was our last meeting. That public hearing was closed that same day, so the public hearing for these items is closed, again, just on tonight for discussion and action. There is a 90-day waiting period after an enactment is approved, so even though the city council tonight may approve these impact fees, they won't take effect until May 11th of 2021 this year if they are in fact approved.
Chase, can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Is there, I mean, obviously there's some sort of logic behind that, but is there that 90-day period for people to oppose it or something? What's the 90-day period set aside for, do you know?
The period, so they can always, anyone can always file with the city an appeal, essentially. But the 90-day period, and this is me trying to interpret legislative intent, is for people to adjust their plans, right?
Okay.
Developers to come in and say, all right, we've got 90 days, and you see that. You see a rush on
Sure.
building permits prior to a new impact fee, or maybe they wait
before
90
it goes
days.
down.
Because
Does
the
it go
impact
down?
fee goes down.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Okay, I see.
That would be my assumption
The
of the
heads up,
90-day waiting
this is
period.
coming. Okay,
And we do a good job, and I commend the rest of staff, Justin and as well as Jonathan on this. We let the Home Builders Association know of these fees ahead of time. We send them a letter, I think it was in December. We sent them a letter saying, just a heads up, these new impact fees are going to be
Nice.
adopted eventually by the city. So we go above and beyond whatever the legislative intent is behind that 90-day waiting period. So
thank you.
And have we received any further feedback from the last, since after the last meeting? Jackie? Have we received any further feedback or comment on this since the last meeting? Thank you.
So the impact fee enactment, which takes the form of an ordinance that we're all familiar with, spells out what those fees are, the process for adopting those fees, which we're going through here tonight, the accounting. It fulfills all of the statutory requirements of an impact fee enactment. And again, if approved, it goes into effect 90 days from today. The council's options are to reject it in its entirety, in which case the existing impact fees remain in place. You can amend the fee down, but you cannot increase it beyond what is proposed in the impact fee analysis, or you can adopt it in its entirety, which for reasons Blake hit on tonight is always recommended. So that's all I have on that item, unless you have any questions for me.
Any comments or discussion by the council? If there's no comment or discussion, I'd be happy to take a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-04, adopting impact fee facilities plan, impact fee analysis, and an impact fee enactment that imposes a storm drain impact fee, providing for the calculation and collection of such fee, and providing for appeal, accounting, severability of the same, and other related matters.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Clint?
yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jared? And I will vote yes. That motion passes. We move on to item 7.2, discussion and consideration of an ordinance adopting an impact fee facility plan, impact fee analysis, and impact fee enactment that imposes a water impact fee, providing for the calculation and collection of such fee, and providing for appeal, accounting, severability of the same, and other related matters. Where's Justin?
Chase.
I'm just kidding, Chase.
Chase, I'm sorry you have to carry so much water for this guy.
I know,
man.
can you believe it? Right? Only had time to get my own stuff done here. No, I'm joking. The discussion on this, or I guess my presentation on this is the same as with the last item. Just for the sake of the public, I'll go through it again briefly. This came before the council January 13th in a work meeting, was presented again by Bowen and Collins. They did the IFFP and the IFA for the city. On January 27th, there was a public hearing on the IFP and the proposed enactment. That public hearing was closed on the 27th. The enactment and the approval of the IFFP are on for decision tonight. And if approved by the council, these impact fees for water would not go into effect until May 11th of 2021.
Any further discussion or questions by the council? You guys want to call Justin up just to make him sweat?
No, he knows us. He knows our game.
All right, well, in that case, I'm happy to accept a motion.
Motion to approve ordinance number 2021-05, adopting an impact fee facilities plan, impact fee analysis, and an impact fee enactment that imposes a water impact fee, providing for the calculation and collection of such fee, and providing for appeal, accounting, severability of the same, and other related matters.
I will second.
I have a motion by Steve and a second by Clint. Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jared? Clint?
Yes.
I'll vote yes, that motion passes. We'll move on to 7.
Mr. Mayor,
Sir.
just a quick comment, if I may. I just want to, from our previous presentation tonight, I think the public probably starts to get a glimpse of what it takes staff time to go through these processes. And I just want to express my appreciation to staff for their effort on this because, again, based on our previous presentations tonight, of how important it is to stay on top of these. So, again, this is a lot of work to get through this process and to update these impact fees. But again, Chase just made a comment about he'd like to get some of his own work done. We recognize this takes, at least I recognize this takes a lot of time and appreciate all the efforts by staff to do this for us.
And we really need to talk to Justin about doing a better job.
Well, he gets to come up on our next item. So 7.3, discussion and consideration of an ordinance adopting and approving an updated water master plan. Justin, you're not going to be able to shove this one off on Chase.
And I don't plan to. Okay, so if you remember in our last, when we discussed and had the public hearing on the impact fee facility plan and IFA, I mentioned that as we went through that process of the impact fee facility plan, we realized that we needed to go back to the master plan and make a minor text adjustment. And it's very minor, but we felt like it needed to be done because we were changing what had already been approved. And so that simple, and I'll just read the line that was added. This has to do with our groundwater and how we interpret what we'll need in the future. So essentially it says what the language that was added was the maximum capacity the city anticipates could be developed is approximately 2,000 acre feet annually with a peak capacity of 2 million gallons a day. So that's talking about our future water production in wells. We're anticipating that we'll need an additional 2,000 acre feet. Now, that was essentially assumed in this, but we wanted to identify it specifically so that as we went through the process, we understood what our goal was. So that's essentially what the change is. So we're looking for an approval to adopt a
And
master
did the attorney have any issues with the proposed change?
No, in fact, I was the one that required it.
I figured.
Yeah. I was the bad guy in this situation, Justin.
I just wanted to throw you under the bus a little bit.
Yep. That was me getting my work done.
Any questions, comments, discussion?
This is a good catch, guys. Thanks for the work on this.
So with that, I will accept a motion on this item.
Mr. Mayor, I will make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-06, adopting and approving an updated water master plan.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. Jared? Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
And I will vote yes, that motion passes. That brings us to the end of our agenda for the for the general meeting. Our next planning commission meeting will be on the 18th. The next city council work meeting will begin at 5:30 PM on the 24th. And then the next general meeting will be at 7 PM that same night, or as soon thereafter as reasonable. We do have some events coming up. One, I believe we are closed for President's Day, is that correct?
We are closed for President's Day, it's correct.
So services at City Hall will be unavailable on that day. And then we do briefly mention the Honda Memorial Service on February 13th.
Yes, so that will be closed to the public. If they're debating, and maybe Commander Adams wants to come up and speak to it a little bit. Depending on the weather, we'll either be outside or inside, but the event will be recorded and played online. So we would encourage, especially if we have to move the services inside, we obviously don't want a big gathering, so
While
we would appreciate people to stay home.
While we have noticed it, we will provide the ability for our public to view it, but we ask that that is not open to the public for that particular service, just to maintain the required social distance. With that, I will accept a motion to adjourn the city council general meeting and go back into a work meeting.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let's take a real quick 5 minutes. We'll begin at 8 o'clock.
big.
And that's what we said 2 years ago.
Which, that's a whole nother problem. Okay, we're back in work meeting. I'm taking my coat off.
Okay. All right, we are back in our work meeting. Thank you very much for those who are still in attendance. We were on item 2, we had just finished item 2.3, which was the impact fee audit. I'm glad it was a good thing to get through that because we acted on some of that tonight. But we do move on to item 2.4, which is discussion pertaining to the proposed engineering standards. Now, Jonathan better be here for this one. We missed you earlier. Chase took over.
Could still be waiting on item 7.1.
I was just trying to run away to see if I could get Blake to do it for me. I brought up the standard here on my laptop in case we need to do a quick search. But anyway, good evening, Council, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to kind of talk about this. We'll dig right in. And before I jump into all of this right away, the approach here is that, you know, we've given, at least in the staff report, kind of we've given you the entire standard, right?
It's what, 700 pages?
Yeah, 400 pages. Now, I gave just a 2-page document that kind of gives highlights on some of those key items. And then this PowerPoint even kind of dials it down just a little more highlights. So what I'll do, I just want to kind of go through this, but then kind of leave it open for questions you might have, and we can kind of go back and forth as necessary. So quick timeline here, we have back in 2017 was the last time this was adopted. So in early 2017, Blake had made the assignment to get the updated started. And so we got to work and hired JUB, a consulting firm who actually consults for other municipalities, and they act as their city engineer for certain cities, typically a rural case, but they're super involved on code and standards, and so we brought them on to kind of add some insight for us. And so we got started in August 2017. And just make a quick plug that this is not just an engineering effort, right? This included all departments and countless workshops with them going through and identifying key issues. And then I want to hit on, just if it's all right, just a handful of items. The first thing that we went to work on was we noticed that we saw that we were somewhat well, I don't know the best way to state this, but the way we structured it, it wasn't necessarily audience specific. And so Chapter 1, for example, is specific to a developer, for example. And that might represent, so these 3 little pictures here to the right, they kind of show the shaded in area as it pertains to which chapter it should go to. So maybe let's just say, for example, yellow is something that would go into Chapter 1 or something specific to the developer. It was kind of all throughout. And so we wanted to make it a little more audience specific, a little easy, reader friendly for the consultant, developer, and the contractor. So we kind of cut and pasted and relocated accordingly. So as part of this effort, we're trying to take a look at perhaps redundancies within itself, within the standard itself, right? And there's ample opportunity for that, and we made a deliberate effort not to do that, just to kind of keep ourselves out of harm's way with that.
400 instead of 500 pages.
That's right. We brought it down a page. And then in addition to that, there's new state requirements that have come out, obviously, since 2011, that we wanted to make sure we were in conformance with those items, including MS4 permitting, water quality requirements, water efficiency standards, which was actually already completed in Appendix G, but we've now formally inserted it into this document as well. We have definition of essential infrastructure, and that's important. I'll talk about that a little bit. We also have a floodplain development permit, which was suggested and recommended by FEMA. And then the state came out with a hydraulic modeling rule, again, a long time ago, but we wanted to make sure we had some verbiage to that. And then some other fun little things we did. We updated our standards to have the new logo and a little more cleaner title block that's 8.5 by 11 as opposed to multiple different sizes. There was a significant amount of additional specifications and drawings for landscape and irrigation specifically.
I enjoyed reading the irrigation valve documents. Those are, the diagrams were quite enthralling.
He's lying.
And as you might anticipate, city staff, they do a great job of being the stewards in their lane. And in often cases, they say, hey, how come this is a problem? Can we fix this standard? And over that course of time, we've accumulated some items and we worked to address that. And that was also specific in some cases to Planning Commission and City Council. So we worked to address those items. Originally, there was only one flow process and it was specific to a subdivision approval procedure. Now, we've added 2 more flow charts. One of them was specific to a site plan where that's a commercial site, institutional, or whatnot. And then also a construction phase and building department review process. And that is to accommodate some shifts in the order for when we can allow and when we cannot allow a building permit to be issued, or when we can receive an application for a permit. So we wanted to make a flow chart specific to that. All right. State statute makes a specific mention to essential infrastructure, and that is in the context of when a land use authority can and cannot withhold a building permit. The only thing that the land use authority can withhold a permit is if it does not include an all-weather surface, complete to the structure, a completed water system. And that's essentially, that's not word for word out of the statute, but that's, there was some need at least for some additional detail on that. So what we did is we defined that essential infrastructure as an all-weather surface that essentially meets UFA requirements. And then a completed water system, we kind of got down in the weeds just a little bit more, and we said, okay, well, that's going to mean commissioning the water utility per APWA specification, ... Right, so we actually dialed in on exactly what that should mean. All right. The MS4 permit, we've talked about that a lot lately, right? This is all the water quality requirements that are required by the MS4 permit with the state. We also have, and that's, there's always
Remind me what MS4 stands for. I'm going to quiz you.
Oh, municipal. It's municipal and then 4 S's, separate stormwater system there, so I'm missing an S in there somewhere.
He's looking at you.
Oh, municipal storm sewer systems. I kind of had the idea.
Yep, you're there.
And then in the drainage report, we've always required that, but now we're requiring how they're going to show that they're meeting these requirements. And that also includes the retention of the 80th percentile precipitation event. And then we're also requiring the implementation of low-impact development by implementation of best management practices for low-impact development. And so we're essentially putting that into the standard. As we're looking forward on this particular project, today and with Planning Commission, we've worked with them already. We've gone to them and talked with them about the standards, solicited some comment. Doing the same today. I hate to say this, but it's true that we may not, there might be some items that we might want to adjust still. And it is standard practice for municipalities to, at a recurring interval, go back and maintain the standard as things adjust. And so our anticipation is to keep this updated every year. And so we would come to the council for, instead of a 500-page document, we're looking at individual specific items that were updated. So we're looking at putting together a group of people to come in and take a look. Hey, does this make sense on this proposed change, at least at the staff level prior to going to city council? One example of an item that we're already looking into for next year, something that we're looking into, is the state has required that we come up with details that we are willing to own and maintain for low impact development best management practices. We are currently working through that and seeing what other cities are doing. It's stepping outside of the norm for typical public infrastructure. So we're asking what other public works entities are doing, checking in on that, checking with manufacturers, and getting a good feel for that, and hopefully come up with some details before the next update. So let's see here. That looks like it appears to be the end. So at that, I guess I'll just leave it up for questions and comment at this time.
So, thank you, and I'll be quite candid here. I have not had a chance to really study these 400 pages, and I feel like I should, because if it's something we're going to adopt, even though I really appreciate your highlights on that and an explanation of how to really peruse the document, I know that this needs to come before us again for official approval, and I would just ask that when that gets scheduled, we give at least 4 weeks to really understand this and make sure that we have any questions that we have answered, so we have adequate time to
Okay.
vet it before it comes before us for
So
approval.
not a special meeting tomorrow or anything?
Yeah, or
Okay.
even in 2 weeks from now, it's like, I don't feel like I could give it adequate.
So, okay, and so what I heard there is probably not February 24th, obviously, but we want to go, we're looking in March.
Yeah, that would be my preference, just so I have a good chance to really understand it and see if I have questions.
You bet.
One question I have on this is I was looking through it, and I'm going to talk about what Sherry did. I perused some pages. Some of these things like this LID thing, right? I'm curious if you're going to have any commentary about what the potential cost impacts for the city would be for adopting these kind of new standards or things like that, and what some of these changes, how they might affect costs for the city, costs for developers. I'd be curious if we could have at least some comment about that.
Yeah.
Maybe not get into too much detail, but
Certainly.
Okay.
I'll first jump into effects on the city. When did we do the stormwater utility study?
A year ago?
2018, I believe, 2019. That was, so I'll say this, we do anticipate additional cost on the city. And that's a part of review. That's going to be part of the infrastructure being installed, whether that's on us or the developer. But if it's on us, obviously, that's the city there. And then in maintenance, reporting, documenting, and submitting to the state. So that was assessed essentially, and that's the hope is that is paid for with the stormwater utility fee.
So this is a mandate,
Yes,
an unfunded mandate?
unfunded mandate.
Always, always, always.
As it pertains to developers, I don't think I have been personally included on developments that we've seen through to the end that have included this and received their candid comments yet. But I have received candid comments already from others, not other cities, but developers as they worked in other cities, and they have seen increased costs to them. I do think that it could be done if it was strategically. There might be some potential where it could offset some costs potentially, but I think the net is we anticipate an increase. I'd like to circle back on that though, and with our own developers and our own projects.
Yeah, it would be cool if you can look into it and kind of look at different ways that we could really minimize that and see if the offset, if they could offset each other, the benefit coming in.
yeah, I agree. I really applaud the idea of adopting better standards, right? Based on going back to what Councilman Smith said at the very beginning, like experience gives us a better insight of what kind of things we need to make changes. You guys have been noting different departments making different changes. I really applaud that. That is a great way to improve our processes over time, right? That being said, also understand the impacts of those changes affect us as cities, it affects developers. And if we can find win-win solutions where we can improve standards and offset costs, or even if there's a way to improve standards and lower costs, right? Yeah. That's a possibility too with certain building materials or certain things going on, right? I mean, there's lots of different ways to do this, but any comment you can get on that would be helpful, at least understanding that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe if I could speak to that quickly, and perhaps in future there's going to be some more comment to that. We currently do and receive, whether it's solicited or unsolicited advice from developers on the cost of those, and they challenge our thinking in often cases, whether it's appreciated or not. In many cases, the challenges our thinking, and we get in and we take a look, and we want to make sure that it's it's a benefit to the city as well as developer as much as possible. That's a good point. I did fail to mention one item that I do need to make mention that will change. This isn't the adopted copy, so it doesn't matter perhaps as much, but in LID, they require 80th percentile storm event retention and flood control. So there's water quality volume requirement, water quantity volume requirement. Our standard, the way it's currently proposed today, is that they cannot be double dipped and they're separate and independent. Statute says that the city land use authority cannot do that. So we have to allow them to include those together. So I have to make that modification here. So you'll see that.
It's good stuff, thank you.
Yeah, it is great, thanks. And
Mr. Mayor, I'm just waiting, I know you had a question on isolation valves. I was just waiting to hear what your question was there.
Oh, he knows what my question is. Do you know what my question is?
I am ready, Mayor.
Are you ready for this question?
Well, okay, I think I am. Let's try this out.
So I've got a question when it comes to private roads and city standard requirements on private roads. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yes.
Because I told you ahead of time that I'd be asking this question, and I've been asking it for 3 years.
I should have had it teed up on the right page, and I'm not there, so we might have to get there. But if I can paraphrase in the standard what's required, and this is first going to sound like it's not relevant, but it is. So all structures, residential structures are to be addressed off of emergency,
This is why I couldn't find it.
an emergency access roadway, whether it's public or private. So they have to be addressed off of one of those. In addition to that, if they are proposing that this roadway is private, if it's their emergency access roadway, it has to conform to the city's standard cross-section. And that's currently as it's proposed here in the standard. So it can be private, but it would have to follow the standard of the current cross-section.
And was that sidewalk to sidewalk, or was that just curb to curb, or what we're looking on that?
Right-of-way to right-of-way, which is sidewalk to sidewalk in most cases.
Sidewalk to sidewalk in most cases. Is there a situation where a developer could choose to move those sidewalks in to make that smaller? Is that addressed?
That is not addressed. Well, right now it says they would have to conform currently to the way the cross-section shows. If they're soliciting for a change, we would see that as a proposed deviation to the standard, which we would then at that point evaluate and bring to council for.
I just want to avoid the situation that we have in one of our communities where we have sidewalk, small street, sidewalk, lots of, with short driveways, and so we have trucks that are basically parked onto the sidewalk at all times, and it restricts flow of emergency vehicles through that area. And so that's my biggest concern regarding how wide that width actually is.
Well, and beyond that, because the street is narrow itself and the sidewalk is right there, then parking becomes on the sidewalk.
It
Not
is.
just extending out of the driveways, but
is on the
actual
sidewalk.
on-street parking is on-street and on sidewalk.
Yep.
If I could give an example of how this procedure might look, you might remember our beloved McHouston roadway. That does not conform, right? And so there were reasons for that, and we brought in that section for City Council's review, and at that time we made that adjustment. So that's how I would foresee an adjustment in that case would happen.
because we maintained the road width, but we didn't do the park strip in.
That is correct, if I recall. It was just the park strip and.
So I know this is a huge document, but trying to do it on my device was extremely difficult. I'm going to request a paper copy of this document in the next couple of days. I know it's big, and I appreciate the effort by staff to put that together for me so that I can look at it. I assume that because we've moved so much, there's not an actual red line version. Is that correct?
Yes, and I can relate to the hard copy. I'm with you there. I'm happy to print it for you.
And I don't know if any other members of council would prefer, I know Jared probably wants a hard copy, so.
It looked like he was looking at Chase. I was like, yeah, you're on it.
It would actually be helpful, that
It's
it's
just
so
such a
hard to
massive
scroll on a
document.
screen and go back and forth and.
So I'm all about recycling, and I promise I will bring it back to be recycled.
Okay. So
I do the same, because I tab the things and then. So I
I'm
can
I'm hearing hard copies for everybody is what I'm hearing.
drop.
Yep.
Okay.
So
Another round. Yeah.
have fun.
Okay.
You're gonna, thank you very much. But
Alan, do we have that in our paper budget?
is there any other immediate concerns or questions for staff on this particular?
No, there's
No,
a
I-
million, but they'll come up later.
Yeah, thanks for all the hard work. This has been a big
So
labor.
I'm expecting that we will, and council, please tell me if you think I'm wrong on this. I'm expecting we're probably going to have to see this at least one more work meeting before we're ready to adopt this. So if we can get hard copies, schedule it for maybe a month from now for another work meeting, and then subsequently for any action that we might plan on taking.
Okay.
Does that sound agreeable to the council?
Very much so.
Yep, to me.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we will move on. Thank you very much. To item 2.5, discussion of a zoning map amendment requested by Judd Messenger, applicant, on behalf of the Academy Village Land Holdings LLC, which is the property owner, and Harriman City, which is also a property owner, to add the VMU Village Mixed Use Overlay Zone to 48.45 acres of contiguous property located at approximately 4002 West Real Vista Drive and 14752 South Academy Parkway. Michael,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and
I
members
can
of
always
the
tell
city
if these are long because
council.
you make it all the way up here before I finish.
Yes, and I know that this is a project that the council's very familiar with. This timeline is more than just the timeline for this particular amendment. This also includes the text amendment that the council had recently adopted to allow for this zoning map amendment that you are considering tonight and will act upon in a future meeting. Again, this is the ordinance that the city council had approved, a text amendment that created this overlay. And the overlay is primarily to regulate future signs within a mixed-use project. This is where the overlay is to be applied. And we did include specific dimensional legal descriptions of the property in your packets. Because again, it is a zoning map overlay. Last time it was a text amendment, now we're actually applying that to this particular property. This property was also the subject of a recent site plan and conditional use approval for Phase 1 of Pod 35, and within Phase 1, it was being anchored by a new Lee's Marketplace. This is currently under building permit review. In addition to the Lee's Marketplace, you can see a couple of pads on either side of the grocery store. And there were also a couple of smaller pads out closer to the roadways. This was just a concept sign plan, just indicating that they're trying to coordinate freeway-oriented signs for Mountain View Corridor, as well as some monument signs, wayfinding signs within the center. Again, this is just a concept plan. This will all be reviewed by the Planning Commission at a later date, assuming that this zoning map amendment is approved by the City Council. Planning Commission held a public hearing on this request on January 21st and recommended to the City Council that this be approved with a 5-0 vote.
Were there any recommendations or concerns that the Planning Commission may have had at that time?
You may recall that we had one commissioner who originally, when the text amendment was proposed, there was some concern about the readability of some of the signs, that concern that maybe there was too much text and this text was too small. He made that comment again as part of this, but he did not abstain from the vote.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've had lots of opportunities to look at this, and I'm excited for this commercial project to come into our city. We're definitely are in need of this type of product, so I'm grateful for that and want it to keep moving along. And it would be really difficult to, I think signage is pretty vital to companies.
Is this going to require a public hearing?
No, the public hearing is held by the Planning Commission. So assuming this is on your next regular meeting, this would be up for an action.
I have no issue with moving it forward. I think that we, like Sherry has said, we have been working on this for a long time, and I don't see, the developer has tried to address every concern that we've had, moved sign distances farther, done everything we've asked them to do. I don't see any reason why we can't approve this at this point.
I have no concerns, and just want to pass on my thanks to the diligence of the Planning Commission of their thoughtfulness as they review this item and make those recommendations to us as well.
Yeah, just one comment. The other day I was driving by Jordan Landing, They're off 72nd, and but they have signs kind of similar to this along Mountain View corridor, and I was driving kind of through there. I kind of estimated the height of the signs, how they're. I think this signage is going to be really great, to be honest. I think it's very reflective of what other developments have had. Even the directional signing in the development, I'm actually really encouraged by that because there's a lack of that over in the other place. And it's hard to kind of find some of these little stores, figure out where they are. So I actually think this is an improvement over what I've seen in other communities near us. And I'm really excited about it. I'm very supportive of it too. This is going to be a great addition.
Okay, if there's no further comments or questions, we will move on to the next item.
Thank you.
Anything else for us? Any questions? Do you understand? Awesome, fantastic. We will move on to item 2.6, discussion of a general plan amendment request by Jeff Neal on behalf of the Reserve at Sky Ranch to amend the future land use map from 31.9 acres of low-density residential to 30.4 acres of agricultural residential and 1.5 acres of commercial located at approximately 13374 South Rose Canyon Road.
So this item and the next item that we will
Like
brief
the next
on
two,
are
yeah.
both the same project. Our current code does allow for concurrent review of a general plan amendment and the zoning amendment. And we have an illustration for your reference of what these amendments will facilitate. There is a pending subdivision that is awaiting the outcome of this project or this request. Again, the timeline on this project, we did have a public hearing with the Planning Commission. We had a public hearing on the general plan and the zoning amendment and the subdivision. During the general plan public hearing, we actually heard quite a few comments of concern, but they were mostly germane to subdivision design and also right-of-way issues. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Again, we have tentatively scheduled or anticipated this would be on your next meeting for potential action by the City Council. As the mayor summarized, it's both a change to agricultural residential as well as commercial. This is the vicinity map for the project. This is the current general plan, and you can see that in this key in the upper right-hand corner, all of this area in the current general plan is saying that we're going to change this from currently an agricultural type use, and we're going to change this over time to low-density residential and essentially move away from agricultural zones. But when you look at the zoning map, we still have a lot of agricultural zoning, and we've been doing subdivision development within that zone. So when this development team came to the city and approached us, we felt like perhaps it would be more acceptable, more consistent to the values of this community to look at not rezoning to an R zone, but maintain the agricultural zone. And they proposed the agricultural 0.25. In addition to that, the agricultural zone is consistent with the agricultural residential land use. And so that's what promoted or sponsored the land use general plan amendment. In addition to the corner parcel being commercial, that was not something that was anticipated in the current general plan. This is the,
Sorry, can you go back to that?
please,
closer?
yeah, this is a little bit closer. You can see that corner commercial that's anticipated.
So that's the holiday right there.
The holiday, and then
Across
there's
the
the
street.
professional offices on the other
Correct.
corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a great place for a commercial spot. Too,
Oh, absolutely.
We're not aware of any actual user or proposed use on that, but it did seem to be appropriate for the property, given the other commercial activities at the intersection.
And it really didn't solicit any negative feedbacks from the comments I read in the neighborhood meetings.
There were some. There were
Yeah,
people
and
who were concerned about some visual impacts, traffic, lighting. There was a request to have a taller wall along the west property line of the subdivision. We'll address all of those
The
issues
things
as
that
part
could
of the
be
subdivision.
mitigated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But not opposed to actually having some sort of commercial there, just simply wanted to lessen the impact it would have on the neighborhood. I like that.
So this is the preliminary subdivision plan that the Planning Commission had reviewed and again tabled pending the decision on the general plan and the next item, the rezone. Again, our statement is that the general plan and the proposed zoning amendment are consistent with one another. Again, this is the actual amendment for the general plan, and the Planning Commission did vote 6-0 to recommend approval of this request.
They recommend any zoning conditions?
So this is just the general plan amendment, and there was no zoning conditions on the next item.
So the request, the specific request is to change the general plan to match their request,
Essentially, that's correct.
essentially.
And then allow for that zoning.
And then allow for that zoning.
Yep.
I don't personally, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. The only concern I have is the density and the number of units that would be allowed in that particular zone, being that the agricultural zone allows for a higher density than what the current general plan says. I would be fine with changing it if we put a zoning condition that limited the number of units for that property on the zoning, whatever, however we do that.
So the general plan designation, its range, as you can see here, is 1.8 to 3.0.
On
The 8.25 goes from 1.8 to 2.5 maximum. So the zoning actually is less than this general plan.
What is the lot
Right.
size difference, though, between the agricultural residential and the low-density residential?
There is. You could do an R110 and just do straight 10,000 square feet lots. You can't do that in our 8.25 zone, right? You can't do just straight 10,000 square foot lots.
What's the minimum lot size in the, so I'm trying to figure out.
The 825 has a 10,000 minimum.
It is 10,000, but you have that density, the maximum.
And bonus.
Yeah, you have a
there's all kinds of-
2.5, so you're definitely going to have, on average, a larger lot size than 10,000 square feet.
Yes.
Can you pull up the map?
Yeah.
Yes.
The other maps again? I want to see how it compares to the area again.
You probably want this
That
one.
one.
Well,
This one and
everything
the one
around is
before it.
acre lots.
Okay.
And across the street is 8.25 to the south,
Well, 8.5 to the south, and then 825,
then 825 in the bigger development.
yeah. And
So
the
that-
new
that-
development's 825.
The 825 to the left there, those are, how big are those lots? Those are big lots.
There are, and you'll see a variety of lot patterns within the 8.25. You'll have larger lots and smaller lots.
Sorry, can you go back to the one that's just a little more
But
zoomed
I
in?
think you only see them if you require them, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, will you go to the other one that's more zoomed in, please? Thank you.
yeah.
So that lighter color that's around it is just 1A. So that's what it's, A1, sorry.
A1.
Okay, cool. I see, okay.
Yep.
And they're requesting to go to A25, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Ooh.
So they're gonna go from approximately 30 units they could build, right? On the A1?
Yeah.
And then in
How
the
many
new,
acres
the
is
new
it?
vision, they've got what, 45-ish or 50?
So if they maxed out,
It's
so
30 acres, so they couldn't get, there's no way, how many acres maybe?
They couldn't get, I'm just
27,
saying.
25 houses?
25 maybe, okay.
Yeah.
And with the rezone, they'd be looking at maybe 50? Is that
So the subdivision plat that's being shown to the planning commission is 61 lots, but I believe that includes the corner commercial.
60, so 60 residential
Yeah,
lots and one
I
commercial
think
lot.
that's right. I'd need to double check the map.
For me, speaking just to the general plan amendment, I'm supportive of the change because of, again, the contemplation of what the general plan called out and the fact that this is realizing that there is much more land remaining in the agricultural zones in the surrounding area. And I believe that this is more contiguous and flows much better with the surrounding area that's out there. So as far as the land use amendment, I'm supportive of that.
Right. The current general plan, again, the low-density residential says you could have 1.8 to 2.5 dwelling units per acre. So if you were to change a rezone, you'd do some type of an R zone, maybe an R115 or something like that.
So sorry, that's the low density residential goes to
Right.
2.5, but the A25 goes to 3.0. Doesn't it? With density bonuses, you can get up to 3.
Yeah, the most
Right.
you can do in the 8.25 is 2.5.
2.5.
Right.
Okay.
So it's like 71 units versus 90 units-ish.
Yeah. So the point here is that the current general plan and the zoning map are not consistent.
Not consistent.
They're not consistent. The proposal is consistent.
To make it consistent.
Yes.
Specifically for the general plan amendment, specifically, I don't see any reason why I would have problems making that change. I think it's consistent with the area. I think it's consistent with with everything else that's in the area. My only concern is, since we are considering these simultaneously, my only concern is that, I'm not saying that this wonderful landowner is in any way trying to do this, but there have been landowners in the past that they're gonna bait and switch and say, oh, well, we showed you 60, now we want 90 units. And so that's my only concern.
They'd
when
never
comes to
get
zoning.
it.
I know they'd never hit
But-
it, but.
Never get it.
So I want to clarify this, because this has always been my understanding, and in the packet, it shows agriculture residential is up to 3.0. It doesn't say 2.5.
That's the general plan designation,
Okay,
not the zoning.
Not the
Because
zoning.
because that's inconsistent then.
That is true, but those are the tools that I have.
Okay, so I guess, so my question is, if there's a difference between the general plan and the zoning, is the request to change the general plan to match the zoning, or to change the zoning to match the general plan? Because it sounds like we're being asked to change the general plan and the zoning at the same time to something totally different than either
Yes.
one of them.
So what happened again is staff in looking at this, we have an A1 property right now.
Okay.
Do we facilitate or receive a request for an R, maybe R115 or R121? Or might it be more palatable to the community to have some type of an A zone? It seems like, based on the projects that we're seeing, people seem to prefer the A zones over R zones. We seem to want that agricultural zoning. So when they submitted the agricultural zone, we also said, now we also have an issue here in that the general plan isn't consistent with the zoning amendment. And we have an ordinance that says that they're supposed to be consistent. In fact, we're not supposed to process a rezone request that's not consistent with the general plan.
Understanding, so if we
So
change,
now you submit a general plan amendment.
if we
and
were
now
to
we're
change
trying to
it
bring
from
them in.
R to A, the A is what
Right.
needs the general plan amendment. Okay, I understand.
Right. So again, if we don't want to change the general plan, then what we're going to be looking at is a rezone for some type of an R zone and not an A zone.
Again, I'm supportive of the request for the general plan amendment and the request for the A.25 zoning in this area. I think it's appropriate for the area and the surrounding area as well.
Sherry, this is your district, right?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of heartburn because everything around it is A1 or A.5. And so
But that's not what its general plan does.
right.
General plan is all,
Low-density residential.
Residential, right?
Yeah, but we've had other people come to us and that are on A1 and want it to go to A25, and we say, nah, we want to preserve some acre lots.
Well, I'm hoping you can see the value of being really thoughtful about our general plan and thinking about it even more than just the map as well. I'm trying to encourage people to say, when we're talking about general plan amendment, it's the map, and we should be looking at the text as well.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, we're looking at it holistically, and I'm hoping that our next plan that we're going to be talking about in a future work meeting here soon, that we're starting to identify, those objectives and make those influential in these decisions that we're making.
Yeah, because if I look at this map that shows everything that's been
Right.
developed,
So if this is not what we want the future to be, we should be saying, we need to change this to some
Yeah,
type of
'cause-
an agricultural
yeah,
designation.
all this yellow right here is already green and developed, so why isn't it all
A lot of
green on
it,
our
not
general?
all of it. There's
But
still
most
some
of it.
opportunities.
But a huge chunk of it
Yeah,
is
a lot of it.
pretty much all the surroundings agriculturals are 100% supportive of that. And I appreciate that you've brought that to our attention rather than just go with an R zone on this to make that change.
Yeah. And again, the corner commercial does seem,
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's appropriate too.
And I think that that's probably part of the getting the units up. I'm sure that's part of the
I thought when I saw the subdivision map, all of the border lots, those are all half-acre lots back there, right? Anything that butts up against 1 acre was half-acre lots anyway. Is that correct?
so
I thought I read that.
the density criteria says that you have to have well, if you want to qualify for it, it just says multiple lots. It doesn't say they all have to be half acre, but you do need to have more than one. We have required that as a zoning condition when we have, as we recently saw when we're butting up to the county, to high country. I don't know that we've done that within the city as a zoning condition.
Honestly, there's such a need for, half-acre-ish size lots, single-family residence in the community. I mean, it's a huge need. There's just not enough inventory of those houses right now, and people are looking for this.
Oh, these will be sold out before they even break
Yeah, I
ground.
mean, it'll just.
Well, the other point I would make in this conversation too is I had a meeting today with a resident actually discussing agricultural uses in our A zones. And if we're going to call them an A zone for agriculture, then let's be a little more careful about what we're doing in that. If we're just going to call it an A zone and make a small lot, what's the purpose, right? So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that there's enough volume of land to truly make it some sort of productive agriculture. If it's a greenhouse, garden boxes, whatever, you can raise sheep on some of these lots and things like that. So let's make sure that we're not just stamping an A on it just to say it's the green color, but we're making these lots large enough to be actually some sort of agriculture.
That sounds like a general plan policy right there.
Do you have, are we in general in favor of them bringing this back for us to take action on? I'm seeing at least
Yeah,
3
in 2
heads say
weeks.
yes.
I would love to hear, I would hope the neighborhood there gets notice about that and that they would come and at least make some comments to the council about that. I'd love to hear their feedback too.
Yeah, I would too. And to be quite candid, when we had another issue, much smaller than this, come before us, I made an effort personally also to go and visit with those neighbors in the area, and I'll commit to do that again, just so I can really understand how they feel about the impacts and how we
Can I see
can.
the subdivision map one more time? Can I see the subdivision map one more time, please?
Yes, yes.
That was really beneficial.
Yeah, it was
last time,
really
yeah.
beneficial, so.
I don't want to over or understate. There were concerns at the meeting, but most of the concerns were specific really about the subdivision development itself. We didn't hear a lot of concerns about specific to the general plan and the zoning amendment.
Okay.
And this will
So
still
we do
go-
have some issues that we need to address. We need to
that will still
mitigate
go
those
through
concerns.
The planning
Right.
commission subdivision process.
Yeah, for sure. And from what I read, it seemed like the developer was also very amenable to that, to working through those
And that's not,
issues.
we'd be putting the cart before the horse trying to
Yeah,
change the zoning or stuff because of our impressions of the subdivision map, right? We need them to go through the process of vetting out a subdivision map before we make any decision. But I think based on what the planning commission's recommendation is and the comments, that I think it would be good for us to have it back next time, so.
Yep. Go ahead, and I would feel comfortable directing you to bring it back for our next meeting for action.
Now, I have another presentation for the zoning briefing, but do you want me to go through that as well, or? It's basically the
I'm
same
okay.
information you saw in your
yeah,
packet.
I think it's the same. I do, and even anticipate that maybe there would be some zoning conditions or things like
Well,
that.
since we have to do it on the agenda, item 2.7 is a discussion of a zoning map amendment requested by Jeff Neal on behalf of the Sky Reserve at Sky Ranch LLC to rezone. Any further information you need to provide us on that?
No.
Okay, so that is item 2.7 as well. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our meeting. No closed meeting? No closed meeting. Fantastic. All right.
I feel like I'm gypped.
I will,
I'm expecting like 3 more hours.
I'll accept
Motion
the
to adjourn.
Need a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.